Welcome to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum's Zoom series, Trolleyology. My name is Kristen Fredrickson. I am the manager of visitor experience here at the museum. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and welcome back to everyone who's been here before for our previous programs. This virtual series features programs on Pennsylvania transit history topics, stories of the trolley era, and the museum's collection that you can experience from home. We usually do these on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, whichever's best for the presenter. And we are going to continue these programs regularly. So if you have a show that you would like to share that fits our museum mission, please let me know. I'm really looking for presenters. We're only scheduled through March right now, which I'll tell everybody about at the end. I haven't even gotten them on the website just yet, but stay tuned. So if you have anything about Pennsylvania, like past or present, the trolley era, cities where our streetcars come from, please let me know. And if you have something that doesn't quite fit those guidelines, reach out anyway. And you can see a full list of upcoming programs on our website, patrolley.org, after I upload those, probably tomorrow. I'll share the link to that in the chat in a few minutes as well. And I want to extend a very special thank you to those of you who donated when registering for tonight's program, and those who made donations through our website this year. We really appreciate your support of our virtual programs. Okay, excuse me. So pretty much all of you already know all about the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, but if you are new, we were established in 1954 as the Ardent Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club. We opened to visitors a few years later in 1963, and the museum's located along the former interurban route between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA. You'll find over 50 trolleys and electric railway cars here. About 20, maybe over 20 of them operate. And the big news is last year we had over 48,000 people take the 4-mile scenic ride here at the museum, which is up 10,000 from 2023. So that is very exciting news for us, especially because we opened our Welcome and Education Center in November of 2023, and people are getting a chance to experience it, which is great. So come on out. Okay, a couple museum updates before we start the program. A couple of these have already passed, like Teacher Appreciation Weekend, but we started a new program this year, which I love. It's Trolley Tots, and this is designed for early learners ages 2 to 5, and each month features a different vehicle. So January was snow plows. PennDOT sent out one of their giant plow trucks and let the kids climb up inside. So if you're local and you know a family with kids ages 2 to 5, send them over. It's usually the third Thursday of the month unless snow reschedules it. So check it out. We've got a couple other events coming up here you see. And volunteer open house is March 8th. If you are ever interested in operating trolleys or getting involved in restoration or the archives, you can come see how we do that and meet all of our volunteers. Should be a lot of fun. I also wanted to mention Vintage Communications Weekend, because this one is more geared towards everybody rather than a lot of our seasonal events, which, you know, are geared towards families. So we'll have the typewriters, the telephones, the radios, old cameras, printing press, all sorts of things coming out that you can experience, and lots of interactive stuff to do. Okay. Another piece of museum news, you can now charge your electric vehicle at one of our EV charging stations. Since our last Trolleyology in November, this is a new installation, so that's very exciting. And then I know everybody always likes to ask about the terrible trolley, PCC 1713. In the left photo, you can see Michael. Mike has been working very diligently to sand the car, and it got a coat of primer recently, and it needs some more work before the final coat goes on. So there's the exterior and the interior. We're super excited. This is moving along. It's going to be painted, if you're not familiar, as the Terrible Trolley, which you can see in the photos here. And just a couple months ago, it looked like that photo on the left there. You can see all the work that he did to smooth it out. And not just Michael, lots of volunteers have been helping too, but Michael's leading the project. If you didn't know, we have our own terrible towel, the Terrible Trolley towel that we sell in our gift shop, which is licensed. And we're really grateful for the partnership with the Steelers and Myron Cope for that. Let's see. I think that might be my last update. Yes, before we turn it over to George. So Let me introduce George because that's what we're all here to see today. George grew up in both Philadelphia and Scranton, developing his trolley interests at a young age in Philadelphia. And after graduating from Penn State with a degree in business logistics, he spent his entire career working in the transit business, first in Scranton and then in Pittsburgh, where he worked from 1975 until his retirement in 2008. He joined the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum in 1975 and currently serves as an operator and a conductor. And he also volunteers in the archives with scouting programs. He gives outreach presentations, and he has been writing for our newsletters since 1977. Okay, and at the end of the presentation, we're going to have a question and answer session with George, but the chat box will be open throughout, so please feel free to enter questions or comments during the show, and we can read through those at the end. I owe George the copy of the chat from the last presentation. Sorry, I forgot to send that to you, but if you have something you want to say, I usually send George the transcript of the chat at the end, and he likes to read through those, so feel free to put something in the chat. And we will record this presentation and put it on YouTube. Everything is finally up to date on there, so you can see all the recordings. The latest recordings are all on there. So at this time, if you don't already have your video turned off, please turn that off, and we'll keep everyone muted until the end. I will invite you guys to turn your microphones and videos back on at the end. Okay, George, I have talked way too much. You want to take it away?
Yeah, well, let's hit share and see if your new Zoom works.
Yes, we'll see if the Zoom updates cause chaos today.
Well, it can. I have to update my Zoom.
Let's see. Started screen sharing. Looks like it's still coming up.
Now,
Aha!
You are seeing something.
Yeah. All right, we're on the third slide, but okay, there we are, back at the beginning. Okay, I'm officially going to turn it over to you, George, now. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank you. I haven't had this kind of a mess for quite a while.
All right. All right, off you go.
All right. Okay, folks, hi. I'm really glad to be back. Kristen had asked me to do something this month because they did not have a Trolleyology lined up. And I thought, well, you know, I did my hometown of Scranton last month. Well, let's go down the valley 19 miles to the other major coal capital in the northern anthracite fields. And there's, of course, quite a few people that did help me. And various organizations, including PTM's archive, the Miller Archive, and a little bit of introduction. Here's where we are. And if you take a look, you can see Scranton and Dunmore. I wish I could make a bigger pointer, but right down the Laurel line is Wilkes-Barre. And that's, you can see that in big letters. This was all anthracite coal company. The Laurel line had run between Scranton and Wilkes-Barre. Coming up from Hazleton, which is just off the map on the bottom, was the Wilkes-Barre and Hazleton interurban. And Wilkes-Barre itself had a major streetcar system. Here it is, nice postcard view. And it population peaked at about 86,000 or so, about 1950. And of course, we had horse cars, everything started. But before that, one of the big things was there was no connection between Scranton and Wilkes-Barre. And at this point, as we learned last month, this was all part of Luzerne County. Lackawanna County had not been formed. And so the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western, as we know it now in the form of the Lackawanna and Bloomsburg, came down the Susquehanna River on the west side. It had crossed up above Pittston, and all of its mines, of course, were over there at this point. And so now they have a station there, and this is the way to get up to and from Scranton. And as you can see in the middle map, take a look sort of on the bottom, and you see that triangle. Well, that's Public Square, what would become Public Square. And you had this mile of track, you know, of road, if you want to call it a road. It was across what was known as the Kingston Flats. Well, 1859, and there was a horse car system started up in 1856, and they were on omnibuses, of course. by 1859, there was so much business, the little omnibuses couldn't handle it. And as was typical back then, before the state constitution of 1874, the legislature had to authorize street railways, and they authorized the Wilkes-Barre and Kingston passenger railway. And outside of Philly and Pittsburgh was the first street railway to be authorized in Pennsylvania. And, it's a typical story. People were skeptical of it, how to raise funds. We had a problem, and this was common in all through Pennsylvania. Oh my God, you're going to have freight cars, freight trains running down the streets carrying coal, and nothing was done. And of course, the Civil War showed up, and that all delayed construction. They allayed everybody's fears about trains running on the streets by building it to what we all know as Pennsylvania broad gauge, 5 foot, 2.5 inches. And finally, the cars started to run on June 25th, 1866, across the Kingston Flats to the railroad station. But not all the way. It ran from the river, and they finally had to get authorization to go into the public square. And the Wilkes-Barre Council had to do that, and also Hanover Township. So they made it to the square by 1866, and then out in 1867 across the bridge. They had so far built in Kingston. So they're going to come down. If you look at the bottom of Public Square, they're going to come down to Canal Street. That was the Lehigh Valley Railroad station. And, by the end of that year, 1867, they were running from Kingston all the way down to the railroad station. Now, typical of what you would see, we all know what a horse car looks like. They initially started with 2 cars, about a third. It was about a 4-mile long road when it was done. First year of operation was pretty good, 130,000 passengers and 350,000 by 1870. Now, it operated only where it made a profit. So they discontinued the East Market service east of Public Square. And on your map, that would have been below Public Square. And the track just stayed there, rotting in the ground. And this is on what was known as the Colville line. Colville would become Ashley, Pennsylvania, which is still a town, an independent town out there. Between 1868 and 71, there was a plethora of additional companies. I believe 7 were chartered, and only 2 were built, not uncommon. One line was up north in the town of Pittston, and the other was the Colville Passenger Railway. And Ashley is sort of southeast of Wilkes-Barre, and they were authorized to build a street railway. And I love this very broadly from any point on the line of the horse car initially, the Wilkes-Barre and Kingston line, to the inclined planes in Colville. Now, they were the Ashley planes operated by the Jersey Central Railroad, and those planes would take carloads of coal, pull them up an incline. Because all the mining was done in Ashley, and then railroads couldn't get into the valley at that point. So they opened that line in December of 1869. Now, the original operation was to be via Main Street. There's Ashley down here, or Colville, Main Street, and Hazel Street. But they're trying to reach Public Square. However, the Wilkes-Barre and Kingston sort of opposed that. They didn't want that kind of competition. And it had to terminate at Main and South Street. Here was Hazel Street here. They ran and they couldn't get into Public Square. They had to terminate out here at South Street. And there had been another Wilkes-Barre and Kingston line that had gone out that way too. Then they would continue up Washington Street and to Market. And they were standard gauge. This Colville line was standard gauge. And what they intended to do was install another rail between the all unused track of the Wilkes-Barre and Kingston. So they laid a third rail down that lot, down this rotting track. And there was a big controversy in council. And newspapers divided as to which line they supported. And mysteriously, the ordinance has changed to allow the second track without council's vote. If you go into newspapers.com, you can really get into a lot of local politics. It's pretty amazing. Okay. And the controversy continues. And finally, city council gave them the written permission to lay the track. And then the horse car, Wilkes-Barre and Kingston Horse Car Company, gave in on December 12th. And for $150 a year, allowed them to use the unused track east of Public Square. And so now you have these three tracks, the broad gauge track, and using only one rail of the initial standard gauge track, and all coming into Public Square. And this is a view looking south from Public Square toward Nanacoke. And this is on South Main Street, again, down in what's known as South Wilkes-Barre. You've got this, you've got all my tools on top. Let's see if I can get rid of them. Let me change my view if I can do that.
You want me to read it?
No, what
Okay.
what I want to do is get rid of everybody sitting here. I can't find my views. Here, I want to get rid of the gallery. There we go. I found it. Okay. So the Harvey brothers. They were involved in all the local stuff you can imagine, coal mining specifically, and lumbering, and they began an investment by purchasing just 20 shares of the Wilkes-Barre and Kingston in 1868. And within 2 years, they had become the largest stockholders of this company. The following year, they sold their coal business, and William moved to Wilkes-Barre. He'd become president of the Wilkes-Barre and Kingston, and he would remain in that position till 1891. At that point, you'll find an electric syndicate or a combine purchasing the operation. So over time, this line became known locally as the Harvey line. Why is it? Here we go. There. The Wilkes-Barre and Suburban. Yeah. This was the first electric street railway, and it had its origins in a local citizen, John Deere. And he had originally purchased 40 acres of land near the downtown, and eventually would become the largest of Wilkes-Barre's subdivisions. This is what I thought was pretty funny. These three yokels down here, B.H. Carpenter, E.N. Carpenter, and A.C. Robertson. Now, they had been in the business of installing electric doorbells, and I guess they felt that gave them a lot of qualification, a lot of electrical experience to build an electric railway. And they convinced Deere that if he invested in it, his land values would increase. So he gets Deere's financial backing, and other local businessmen are also involved, and they organize the Wilkes-Barre and Suburban, and that is started up June 23rd, 1887. Scranton's already been running for a year, and they get municipal permission to build any cable or electric railway looping through the north part of Wilkes-Barre. And this was Suburban's sole open car number 10. This photograph was told me at Luzerne County's Historical Society was the first car, and they began construction in October of 1887. The first car ran in March of the following year. And as you would have it, a very severe ice storm had hit, and they had, in some cases, 2 feet of ice on the track. So people were going along in front of the car, chopping it all up. This is car 5 on Cary Avenue. And they were doing all the testing, of course. The actual formal opening where the cars are open for passengers is March 31st. And they run east from downtown to Brookside, which I have no idea where the Duck Pond is, but I think that is a little bit south of Wilkes-Barre. They hit Miners Mills on December 8th, 1888. That is a little bit north of Wilkes-Barre. And they go farther up to Plains, farther north, on December 10th. So this is at the Canal Street barn. I got lucky. I got all these stock certificates in an East Penn, and I'm able to use them. Now, we're going across the river to the west side, Kingston and some of the other communities. And there's an attorney, John B. Reynolds. And in May of 1887, he chartered two companies, the Wilkes-Barre and West Side Electric Railway, Street Railway, and the Wilkes-Barre and Kingston Bridge Company. And the map over here on the right will show you that. There is you see Wyoming Avenue. Well, let's come down parallel to Market Street on Pierce Street. And that is another part of the Kingston Flats. And he wants to build into town via Wyoming, well, back and forth on Wyoming Avenue, north and south, and also wants to go up to Bennett Street in Luzerne, and he wants to get into Wilkes-Barre via Pierce Street. And they opened up their bridge, their new bridge, still a bridge there, September 1st, 1888. And they have to open Pierce Street, so they're building that. That work begins in 1888, and it's finished about a year later, the fall of 1889. And and then of course they get blocked. There's a D&W railroad in there, and railroads don't like, trolleys crossing their tracks. And the D&W did a lot of this in Scranton. They would block grade crossings, and they had to go to court. And finally, they got a grade crossing with the D&W, and also the Lehigh Valley Railroad on Bennett Street. So you're up over in this area here. Bennett's up here, and you can see both the LV Railroad and the D&W. So that they're moving out to Luzerne and eventually Courtdale. They used the Sprague system to obtain power. On Pierce Street, they put a barn, which is no longer there. It was there for a long time, though. This is supposed to be Reynolds' home. They had their trial trip December 7th, 1889. And of course, all the important people were there, council members, railway officials, and stockholders. And they began regular service 2 days later on the 9th. They used 3 Brill closed motors and 2 open cars. And we think this is his home. And friends are supposed to be getting off here and enjoying after their trolley ride. Now, they still have some other issues here. The Suburban's another broad gauge system. Okay, it's the same gauge as the local wagons, and it's an advantage to the people driving the wagons because they're out of the mud. The West Side was standard gauge, and the Suburban was broad, and neither one initially wanted to convert. Also, when you come across the Pierce Street Bridge, there's a pretty steep hill, and it was really too steep for streetcars. And the residents up there on the hill didn't want it. And the railroad wasn't really letting them in to Public Square. So residents had to get off and walk a number of blocks into the main business area of Public Square, or you can transfer to an omnibus, and today we'd call it a taxi. While the company fought the Lehigh Valley, they finally got on the bottom map they were able to get a strip of property between River Street, which is right here along the Susquehanna, and the street 2 streets up, Main Street. And they finally got a right of way through there, and the city gave them a right of way through a bit of parkland in 1890. So they opened up to River Street just north of Union in 1890 and had to keep extending it. And when they finished their extension, they were still a quarter mile from Public Square. And until all these different companies were merged, people would have to walk that quarter mile from Public Square. Okay. Now, Reynolds is kind of a smart guy, and, he sees what's going on in the traction world, and he understands the syndicate of some type is going to show up. So he gives himself a golden parachute. He was manager for 5 years, beginning January 1, 1890. He gets paid $2,000 annually in advance for his full term. So he's able to sell out in January of 1891 when a syndicate moves in. At that point, local money is running out, and a local attorney, G. Mortimer Lewis, tried to get outside capital. He knows we've got to consolidate the lines, have a unified fare system, get the system expanded. Nobody is expanding. And he attempts to do this with New York investors, and it doesn't work out. And finally, in 1891, he gets 6 incorporators from Pennsylvania. Some are from the Harrisburg area. And they charter the Wilkes-Barre and Wyoming Valley Traction. And this company goes to acquire all the existing companies and their leases or their leases. And that's done by 1892. Now, Pennsylvania law is kind of funny. And the Wilkes-Barre and Wyoming Valley is a traction motor company. It's allowed to lease and operate any lines out there, but it can't build their own lines. So a ton of dummy companies are created to build different lines up and down or north and south of the valleys. And these are corporations that are not covered by the original franchises. This car, the Anthracite, was a parlor car. We don't know much about it. Originally, we know it was white, and later it was Pullman green, which I'm sure is what you're seeing here with gold striping. Nobody knows where it went, how it was disposed of. But it's pretty formidable tax going up and down the river valleys, and they had to electrify all the horse car lines. They had to go ahead and get the gauges, and they were standard gauge. They all became standard gauge. They had to replace a lot of the original equipment, and they go up and down the valley, and you can see Plymouth up here, 1892. The service to Edwardsville was March 8th. West Pittston is way up here. There's no bridge yet to cross to the main town of Pittston, but that's extended up in 1892. And they're moving along. The suburban lines here, Heights in Georgetown, which is on the hill above Wilkes-Barre here on the bottom, 1895, and they reached Nanticoke in 1893. They also crossed the Susquehanna in July of 1895, and another line to Pittston is developed. Or I'm sorry, Plymouth. Now, there were cash problems, and 1897 was a bad year financially. There was a depression, cut the income to a whopping $20,000. So, of course, wages are cut, and services is cut, and they have to find money somewhere. They're trying to borrow it. And even though business recovers in 1898, the business doesn't come back in terms of the economy's good, but they don't get as many people as they did, believe it or not, in 1896. And their equipment, although we would think it's pretty cool, is pretty antiquated. And there's Kingston Corners down on the bottom, which is across the Susquehanna from Wilkes-Barre. And we're at the old courthouse, Public Square. So this guy enters up, and some of you may have heard of John Rigg. Quite a career. He becomes a conductor, a horse car conductor in 1874, and 4 months later, he's the superintendent of the company in Reading. He's the guy that consolidates all the Reading companies into one traction company in 1893. And in 1899, he charters the United Power and Transportation Company. And like the Insuls, it's an investment company which buys the stocks of other railway properties. And he did this in Jersey, in Delaware, and in Pennsylvania. Now, he took all the savings that the company obtained after costs were paid, and he would buy more stocks. He never really put it back into the company. The entire income paid bond interest and 10% stock dividends. So it was $41 a share he offered for the Wilkes-Barre and Wyoming Valley Traction. That was accepted in 1899. Now, Interstate, his company Interstate, defaults on its bond interest in 1909. And, the reorganization produces 4 different groups of lines: Wilkes-Barre, Reading, in the Wilmington-Chester area, and in Trenton. And the Wilkes-Barre Wyoming Valley Traction, and there's another one we'll talk about, the Wilkes-Barre Dallas and Harvey's Lake, were leased to this newly chartered Wilkes-Barre Railway Company. So everything is reorganized, and there's quite a few of Wilkes-Barre's prominent financial people involved with this, so it's easier to raise money. And you wind up in 1895 with a system that just about 50 or 51 miles of routing. That doesn't include the line to Harvey's Lake. they're only going to build 8 more miles of extensions by 1909, and that was pretty much the end of expansion in Wilkes-Barre. We're over on Wyoming Avenue, and this is a north-south street running through communities like Kingston and Plymouth. We're going north, Exeter, Wyoming, and West Pittston, and it's a predominant street even today in the Wilkes-Barre area. It's on the other side, the west side of the Susquehanna from downtown Wilkes-Barre. And here are, I'll let you guys look at it, but they opened the line up to Avoca. So now we're heading north from the town of Pittston to Avoca in segments. And it was done by 1914, and they build the branch from the existing Nanticoke line to Hanover. The Truesdale breaker had opened for the D&W Railroad. Concrete City was opened. That was 1914. They built a short line so that the Harvey's Lake cars, which were somewhat interurban in nature, wouldn't have to grind away on Bennett Street. That was a very busy street. They were building tracks on Plains and Hudson and Miners Mills, which is east of Wilkes-Barre, east and somewhat north of Wilkes-Barre. Finally made a little extension to the end of the Plymouth Borough line, and they did a lot of track renewal. They put a double track here on Wyoming Avenue, and they also would eventually put in safety islands. This was, you have the electric starter in automobiles, and that makes it much easier and safer to start a car. More people are buying some cars, even in those early days, and they demand better roads. And so you wind up having paving going on. And in 1915 at Wilkes-Barre, you have this phenomena called the jitney. And using anything you had, some people had small buses, they had cars, any kind of motorized vehicle possible was used to run along the car lines and pick up people. They would skim the business, and people didn't care what they were riding as long as they got there. This became a nationwide problem, and it was a real problem in Wilkes-Barre because there was a huge strike that started at the same time. It was ruinous. 1914, there was a strike, and that was over the usual working conditions, wages, job security, seniority, unionism. And that ended, but the wage situation was not settled. And then there was another proposed strike in 1915, which was avoided because they were able to mediate some of the issues, but wages were not mediated. And then on April 1st in 1915, you had a 9-day strike, and an arbitration agreement was not very favorable to the union until more politics is the union got an arbiter to change his mind. Then there was a confrontation with company president Abram Nesbitt, who was a local person of quite a bit of note and had quite a bit of money. And the director was Fred Kirby. He had a string of stores associated with Woolworths. He was the stock owner, the primary stock owner. He basically said that we're going to spend $1 million of our money in order to win this strike. And it was a violent strike. Began in October of 1915. Not only were the operators out, but organized labor, i.e. most of the miners went out. The average citizen was supporting the operators, so only 60% of the service was out there. The loads were low, maybe only 10% of what normally should have happened. And over time, it looked like the strike would fail, but people still, much like they did in Chester, would not ride the cars, or people were intimidated not to ride the cars. They brought in Berghoff Brothers. That was a professional strike breaking group, and they brought in laid off workers from Brooklyn to reopen the service. And the strike breakers' arrival just caused all sorts of violence and destruction. Citizens rivalry. They wanted to deputize the strike breakers so they can carry arms, and the sheriff said, no, they're not from the area. We can't do that. We don't know where they're from. We don't even know if they're from the country. Eventually, the state police were brought in from Wilkes-Barre and down the line in Pottsville. And eventually, the state police got control of all of the lawlessness, violence, sabotage that was going on in early 1916. And then the court got involved and said to the union, you can't uh, interfere with the operation of the cars. So eventually, they had to train the local company had to locally hire replacements. They never really hired the strikebreakers, and they replaced them all. Now, um, the jitneys, of course, at that same period of time, gave the union an advantage because it was another way people were getting around. And the jitneys caused such a traffic mess within Public Square that the Automobile Club and the merchants in 1916 just protested that. They demanded the vehicles be regulated. None of the jitneys, of course, were. The Wilkes-Barre Railways published a pamphlet of clippings that described all the nasty accidents that were occurring throughout the valley. So the Public Service Commission in March of that year hands down a decision that the jitneys are on a regular route; they're a public carrier. And immediately the Waddell men, the Wilkes-Barre Railways people, begin spreading rumors that the jitneys are illegal. The drivers were subject to fines and imprisonment. They took down license numbers to intimidate these jitney operators. And believe it or not, there's a Wilkes-Barre Jitney Bus Association. They formed to attempt to oppose the railway. And Nesbitt and Kirby, they're not making idle threats. They're spending more money. But finally, the Public Service Commission says that jitney owners were common carriers. They were subject to the rules and authority of the Public Service Commission, and this pretty much ended the competition. So, trolleymen have to accept drags on to December 15th of that year, and the mine workers by now are back to work. So we don't have this major citizenry not working. They all have to earn their money, and so the company wins. And the drivers have to, 190 men go back and they settle the wage issue. But the company doesn't make any money anymore until it's reorganized again in 1924. It had been making a small profit, $117,000, $120,000. So they have this major deficit of almost $1.5 million in that period, that strike period of 1915 and 16. And right after that, we enter World War II, into World War One, rather. I'm sorry. And the strike, had been broken. The bank, Chase Bank of New York, had provided money. Abram Nesbitt had provided 600 and some $1,000 of his own money to battle the strike. And now you're faced with increasing costs. You want to buy more equipment? You got to pay more. You have to pay more in wages now. Cash flow issues are another problem. Nesbitt has to put in more money. And this results in fare increases, and the zone fares go up from 5 cents to 6 cents in 1916 and March, and 6 months later to 8 cents. And now comes a second whammy, another whammy, a third whammy, as the Spanish flu or influenza breaks out. And, as it's really taking down people, the flu took down a lot of young people. The state health commissioner basically closed saloons and parks. Locally, Wilkes-Barre would close bottling plants and breweries and factories. And this, of course, affected the ridership. They were prohibited, the company, from carrying standard standing loads, although that's not been proven as really happening before, but they weren't allowed to. So, and the people were hostile. Many of them were walking rather than paying the increased fare. And so business basically collapsed in October of 1918. And the company eliminated 9 cars from the schedules, and it required even more money, $50,000 each, from Nesbitt and Kirby from their personal funds. So the war ends and the epidemic subsides and business improves, and some of the store services restored, and the company even starts paying off some of its loans. But there's John L. Lewis, very famous person up in the coal regions, and now he calls it general mine strike. And anthracite coal production is um, the primary business in that area. And so miners are not riding anymore. It's a 5-month strike. It ends in 1922. It won't be the last strike in the 20s. But now you have a revenue decline of over $300,000, and you can't pay the debt back when you have that kind of a decline. 1923 business, the mines are back, the business picks up. They try to pay off the debt. Believe it or not, by November of that year, all but 250,000 of the money borrowed from the banks had been paid. But Nesbitt was dead. He had died in 1920, and 500,000 of 6% demand notes were still out there. Wilkes-Barre Railways had also always considered this a ever-present threat of disaster because they owed that much money. July 1, 1924, the new Wilkes-Barre Railway Corporation is organized, takes over all the leases and obligations of the former company, and that company was dissolved. Pardon me. So stock is exchanged, and all of the usual things go on during a reorganization. The management is unchanged. And the corporation, this new corporation, inherits the 999-year-old lease that's still owned by John Rigg. And they also inherit all the leases of all of the underliers. Here we are in Dallas. This will be the cutback point of the Harvey's Lake line. And a bus will head up to Harvey's Lake after rail service is reduced. But this shows the Wilkes-Barre, Wyoming Valley, Auto Bus Company. That's formed in 1924. During this reorganization, they're instituting some buses in territory that doesn't have any public transit. And they take one route all the way up to Old Forge, into Old Forge. Now, you have to go understand, Scranton Railway had been coming south. They had gone from Old Forge to Duryea. And in 1926, they cut back into Old Forge, and the Wilkes-Barre Bus Company extended from Duryea to meet the Scranton cars in Old Forge. And there's no record right now that Dr. Cox had actually examined. Harold Cox had examined all the records of Wilkes-Barre Railway. Somehow they had survived the 1936 flood. They were in the car barn at that point. And nobody's really thinking about replacing the streetcars until 29. There's a very lightly used line on North Pennsylvania Avenue, just north of Wilkes-Barre, and they convert that to bus operation. The 1931 cutback at Harvey's Lake, that's what we're seeing right here. And we will talk about Harvey's Lake. This is up in Georgetown, the end of the Georgetown line, and the kids are crossing the Jersey Central Railroad. And, this is what goes on in the 20s. They extended the Nanticoke line 1 block. They got it off Main Street and out of the traffic because that's where the line laid over. And they didn't want to extend this line to this point, but they were forced to by the Public Utilities Commission. About 1,000 feet of track had to be laid up here at the Jersey Central Railroad. The new South Street Bridge is built in 1925. It's open, so Ashley cars can now be rerouted across that. And finally, up in Pittston and West Pittston, a bridge connects those two towns, allowing the West Pittston line to finally get into Pittston. So, and they would continue to renew track until about 1928, and then finances would deteriorate. Oh, this guy is a refugee from Pottsville, the Eastern Pennsylvania Railways. They had a fairly new fleet of cars bought in 24 and 25. And, the last of the cars ran in 1932. And Wilkes-Barre had a lot of heavy cars, heavy wooden cars. And they bought this stuff to replace those heavy wooden cars. It would speed up service, certainly use less power. Now, this is going to go on here. There's the Wilkes-Barre connecting railway up here, right next to the connecting railways. The car barn is beautiful, private right-of-way on West Market Street that connects Wilkes-Barre and Kingston. And, you know, the new deals here, automobile construction, road construction is going on. The WPA, the government gets involved. They're hostile to streetcar operation, of course. But they will rebuild the track here because of the location of the carboy, but they're going to take out the private right-of-way and replace it with in-street and paved track. Now, Wilkes-Barre, you would think that they would start investing in just buses. The track was poor at this point. You know, equipment was starting to collapse. They were running out of money. Instead, because there's access to cheap power, you know, poles are up, some of the wiring's still up, they're going to form yet another company, the Wilkes-Barre Trackless Trolley Company. And they're going to want to replace streetcars up in Kingston and Luzerne and up towards West Pittston. That's one long street, and just going to concentrate on that. Here's the first day of service out there on Kingston Corners, Wyoming Avenue at Market Street. And the buses are delivered by, of all things, the Delaware and Hudson Railroad. And there's a connecting track coming down into the yard. There's some derelict cars on the left. And there's what we think is a former Harvey's Lake car that's been converted into work service, will operate until about 1940 or 41. They'll move the buses around into the yard. They've paved part of the yard already. And then the D&H is going to drag it back. This is how they were delivered. Looking all the world like one of the Philadelphia cranes, pretty similar. It's a Brill. 022 is out here. They've abandoned that line, this major line through 8 communities. Trackless trolleys are running. And they're going to spend an awful lot of money to remove the tracks, remove the trolley wire itself. Highway department's going to be involved. The final cost of this is $200,000. You know, it's a lot of money. And it'll include WPA people, almost 500 men, I believe the number is, and Wilkes-Barre Railway crews to get this street in shape for automobiles. Here's the car line. The shop, the big shop is in the back, that big square building. And for quite a long time, the Luzerne County Transit Authority used that building. And I remember going down there, being sent down there sometimes. There were tracks in it. And that car barn here behind the trolleys still in use as an automobile dealership.
George, all of a sudden I'm seeing your slides on the
Yeah, I
line.
don't know why. And I'm not being able to move it, and I didn't do anything. What do you think happened?
Oh. Well, it's gone now.
There, I don't know.
Okay.
Whatever happened, I fixed it. There, it's magic. So, you know, here it is, Thursday, January 25th, 4:50 in the morning. The first trolley coach is running up to 44th, and we'll see some of that line in a little bit. That's the upper, going toward the upper Wyoming Valley. Now, here we are in Ashley, and this is a Jersey Central crossing. And they're really working fast to convert lines. Parsons, Plains, Miners Mills, Hudson are over just north of Wilkes-Barre. Grove, Brown, Heights, and Ashley are sort of south of Wilkes-Barre. And the last of the conversion was Ashley, and it runs on August 6th, 1941. And the line stays intact because the railways is fighting with the communities involved, Sugar Notch, Ashley, Wilkes-Barre, over track removal. You know, who does it? You know, who's paying for it? How much? Well, World War II shows up in the meantime. And as we've talked about before on some of my programs, you have the Office of Defense Transportation, which is going to regulate and control all transportation in the country. And September 1st in 42, they come to Wilkes-Barre and they see this track here and they say, you know what? We don't need rubber tired vehicles here. We can use the existing trolleys. The track's all there, except for this crossing that Jersey Central had taken it out, and they had to put it back in. So the line was abandoned and it came back. And after the war, it was abandoned a second time in 1946. And trackless trolleys were finally installed on the line. Here's what the system looks like at the end of the war, World War II. And here's Public Square. You come out to West Market Street, all of this has been abandoned. Wyoming Avenue, Plains, Parsons, they're all here. They have a line via Larksville, which ends over here at what's known as Bull Run. The Edwardsville line is going to come across through mining country on Church. There's a line in South Wilkes-Barre, a very densely populated area, and Cary Avenue is going to come into Plymouth all the way down to the borough line here in the south. Nanticoke, which is the big interurban line, or semi-interurban line down here, and this little appendage of it would continue to run to some coal mining. And here was Georgetown and the Heights area, and Ashley was down here, the Ashley Sugar Notch area coming across the South Street Bridge. So that's what we have. And they abandoned Ashley as a rail line and that includes Sugar Notch in September 1946. The Heights in Georgetown, this area here, goes in August of 47. Then they get rid of the Plymouth line through South Wilkes-Barre. Those tracks will stay for Nanticoke, but they'll no longer cross the Susquehanna Bridge here. Both in August, Edwardsville and Larksville are going to go on different days. That leaves the Nanticoke and Hanover lines. They'll both be abandoned October 14th, 1950. And in the meantime, they had to move the Nanticoke cars out of the car barn and into an old paint shop in South Wilkes-Barre because the bridge, the Market Street Bridge, was going to be rebuilt and track was not going to be put on. Here's the end. And of course, everybody's packed to the gills. And, newspaper accounts show nobody collected any fares, and people stripped everything out of these cars, including the light bulbs. It was the Wood Street car house or former paint shop that was their last location to live. 788 was an Eastern Pennsylvania Railways car, and now we have another reorganization. In fact, you'll have two. And one was supposed to have happened during World War II or right before, but the war, of course, got in the way. So here we are in 1949, August, and a new company, the Wilkes-Barre Transit Corporation, assumes control of everything. On top of that, ATE, or American Transportation Enterprise, it's a New York holding company, and they operate a lot of different medium-sized bus systems, including Harrisburg and Reading. They take over on August 1st of 1958, and they didn't want trackless trolleys. Their idea was we move buses from system to system as we need it. We buy new buses for our best system, and then the junk from that city goes to replace junk from another city, and the trackless trolley got in the way. Wilkes-Barre had estimated an 18-month period to get rid of all the trackless trolleys, and ATE did that in 31 days. And 838 was the last last coach to run. Here's a few pictures of the coaches. This is down in Public Square. Now, they had abandoned a line. They consolidated the Parsons trackless with a bus line on North Pennsylvania Avenue, so they got rid of trackless up there. This was over at Kingston Corners, and they had to pay at least $5,000 a month to the power company for a minimum of power usage. So if they use less than their minimum, they still wind up paying the minimum. And there's when you keep reducing the service as they were, there was very little, if any, savings. And I mean, they already had about half of their fleet at 20 years or older, and they really didn't have the funds to replace them. And Miller took all these. He was really surprised that the trackless was going. He tried to get some pictures, of course. And the trackless all went in September of October of 58. What they did was transferred 17 buses for Harrisburg. They bought some old Wilkes-Barre buses that were on the property, and some used equipment came from other properties, and that's what happened. And everything went away. I remember coming down and seeing these when my dad would drive through here. Then I remember seeing the wires and nothing was under them, and I kept looking for a trackless trolley. Here we are in Pittston, which you can see was a major community, also supported by mining. And the Laurel line is off to my right, 1 block. That's their station up there. West Pittston. All pretty areas. Here's a color shot. Very few color shots exist. Wilkes-Barre trackless, and they were not sold anywhere. I think they were pretty much all scrapped. Now look at Public Square. I've talked about that. And you know, what is it? Well, here it is, right in the middle. And it's Market Street, North Market going off to my right, South Market going off down below to my left. You can see everything built around it. Major square. It was a major transfer point for streetcars. Going south out of the square was south, and then north Main Street. And right below the picture is the Laurel Line Terminal. Here's the Market Street Bridge. You're looking at the Armory up here, and right behind the trees is the car house. What they call the Westmore car house. So it's another view of Public Square, and they were able to schedule their cars so you might have 3 or 4 cars laying over on each track, changing ends, picking up people, and leaving. There is a combination of a trackless and a streetcar. This is supposed to be 1940. But yeah, 3 routes right here. Look at all the routes scattered around Public Square. A dispatcher was accommodated in that shed, so somebody was there to take over if other issues developed. What a place this must have been. Look at all the people shopping out there. I mean, that always amazes me here. 4 cars all dropping off and changing ends at the same time. This guy looking at the passengers coming off probably just got there. We're going to probably see more of Wilkes-Barre than you want to see, because I had done this originally for the Hoosier meet, and those guys like to see a lot of stuff, you know. Now, the Wilkes-Barre and Suburban was the first electric railway, and it went up to these towns, Parsons, Miners Mills, and all the way up to Plains. And it was originally broad gauged. It had to be standard gauged, and the original line looped in both directions, via North Main and Hollenbach and River and Chestnut. And don't worry, because I know where they are, but I'm putting up the maps so that you could see where they are. And we're talking about this area here is Chestnut. Now, like Hollenbach is up here. You'll see the Hudson line coming down here. But right now we're going to talk about Miners Mills and Plains. There we go. And you can get an idea of what the neighborhoods were. Unlike some of the mining communities down in the southern anthracite fields, only about 3% of the homes were actually owned by the mining companies as we go out North Main Street and on Elm Street. You get a good idea of what the area was like. Very densely populated here. And yet old neighborhoods. Some of these homes probably were 1880s, already 60 years old here. And there's a mix of paving, obviously. Stores, everybody lived on top of stores. And that could have been families that owned the stores or boarders, renters. Here's a car heading out on Miner Road, and you're going into mining country. These big structures are coal breakers, and you know, the coal will be taken up out of the mine from up an incline and crushed in various ways and resized so it fits the grates of the stove. And there was plenty of private right of way in Wilkes-Barre. This is what's known as Tasker Corners, and the last car ran here in 1939 in the fall in 1939, and trackless trolleys would replace them. Not right away. There was some bus service. I've tried to find this private right of way, and down in here, there are buildings built. You can't find any evidence of this bridge. There's a railroad crossing over there, and there's still a railroad. There's absolutely no evidence until you wind your way up in this group of trees. So you can't find anywhere where this was. You can only guess. And the church is there, of course. When you got to the top, if you entered from the top, you can walk several 100 feet down the right of way. And it hasn't changed at all. The buildings are still there. You could see where the car sat. Yeah, there's a line in front of me, and there was no real direct connection. Nobody ever looped through here. And, I look at pictures like this, and I always have to wonder, these two kids just hanging out in a nice, sunny, probably warm October day in 1939. And they're probably teenagers in high school, and you wonder, did they get drafted? Most likely. Did they survive? Hard to know. But you have to wonder when you look at pictures like that. Here's Miners Mills, or Irish Town, as they call it. We'll be using, out Scott Street. It's going to cross a number of railroads. The D&H is down in here, the Lehigh Valley, the Jersey Central. All of this area now is full of railroad yards. They're not there anymore. And, but, that line first ran in 1890. And they only went as far as Laurel Street at first in this area here. Laurel doesn't show on the map, but eventually they will make it to Miners Mills up here at Main Street. There's mining, I know, up here. People have built new houses and they don't realize they're on top of mine tunnels. They're going to make an extension up to here, Hill Street in Cleveland, and in 1910. They wanted a loop with the Hudson line, which was here, and they never did that. This building is the Wilkes-Barre and Hazleton structure. The trestle's no longer here because that line disappeared about 1931, and this is 1940. But the Laurel line is over on my right. And, I'll wander down through an area which was really has changed. New roads down through here. A lot of these old buildings. That's the Delaware and Hudson. They're gone, excuse me. And there's the D&H Roundhouse. And you can tell because there's a D&H steam locomotive as we head out Scott Street. Small sidings. You probably could stick two cars in any of the sidings that were on this line. Typical housing, 1870s, 1880s housing, and a lot of single track here in Wilkes-Barre, and a mix of paving too, as you can see. And it was not uncommon. You look at that house on the right, and there's no paint. You wonder where the hell the paint is. It was not uncommon. I can remember in the 60s seeing houses like this. The paint in the anthracite area continually came off because there was sulfur in the air from the burning dumps like the one that you see over there on the left. And when the aluminum siding people came in, they made a killing. Almost everything up there now has aluminum siding. Here's the Baltimore colliery. It was owned by the D&H Railroad. And over here on the right, you can see behind some of the piping is a streetcar. And, there in the middle is the shaft. Mine coal would be taken straight up out of the ground. And the state law, since the Avondale fire killed 100 people, that you couldn't put this big breaker on top of the shaft. And so they had to move it on conveyors or use mine cars to move it from one location to another. Scott Mill. So many little stores. Now, you'll see this later. Here's a Miners Mill car passing. And it's a Parsons car at the end of the line. And people have always wondered, why didn't they link? Well, apparently the Parsons cars actually was over on my left. They had crossed to get out of some heavy traffic and were laying over on my left until the Miners Mills line came in. And then they retracted their track, or they moved it back. And because they didn't want to spend the money, or they had no money to install crossings. That's what's known as a culm, C-U-L-M dump. And at this point in time, I can see a conveyor pulling that off. Initially, this was all scrap coal and coal that was just too small. frankly, and they didn't know how to burn it for a long time, but they figured it out eventually, and then the dumps were starting to be taken down. If you look down this road today, it's all homes. They have no idea what they're sitting on top of. Here's the tunnel. Only thing left is this abutment. In fact, there's another mine shaft. These, whenever you saw one of these structures, you knew there was a tunnel down there, and cars would move around. Near the end of the line was private right of way, and I was able to drive along here and figure out where some of this was. Some of those houses aren't there, but the walls are, and that allows me to see it. And then you came down this private right of way. That's all fill, most likely from the comb dumps. It was cheap material, and you would get down to the end of the line at that bridge. There's another mine, and in some cases, these mines would they would have to move the coal from the breaker to the mine. There's no breaker here via coal car. And finally, I got down. You get down to the end of the line, and you can see this, and it's somebody's yard, and they wanted to know what the heck I was doing down here, looking at it. But here's Plains, and they would, Plains is, and I'm gonna find Plains. Here's Parsons. I can see that. My eyes are so wonderful. But they needed to build this area here. And they had a lot of disputes with both the D&H and the Jersey Central Railroad, to come down George Street. That was the logical route to go through here, and but they couldn't do that, and they had to get injunctions, and they fought the railroads, of course, fought the crossings. Initially, they get to run to the D&H crossing, and then they came up with an agreement with the D&H, and then they had to run only as far as the Jersey Central, and eventually they're going to get up here in 1891, and this is that other line that's going to end here, but then it'll come across for a little bit till about 1909. For 4 or 5 years, they crossed over Scott Street, and then they went back. Now, got to have the Laurel Line. You're coming out the public square, and the Laurel Line had watchmen here as they rumbled this public square in the background. As you rumbled past a marvelous combination of stores and homes, many of which are not there anymore. New buildings have been installed or nothing. And the last Parsons car is going to go away in September of 1941. The buses will run during the war, and then the trackless will be installed in 1945. And this line will have trackless for about 10 years. That's the line that was consolidated with Pennsylvania Avenue, one of the small sidings, North Main at Culp. And there's a lot of up and down. Part of it is the topography. But if you see, and that's part of the colliery over here, and that structure is a good view of the elevators going down, and sometimes 1,000 feet. You always had, and there's a comb dump, which could be burning over on the left. That's mine property. Clearly, that's mine property over there in North Washington Avenue. And there's always a mix of buildings surrounding it. Here's George Street, looking down George Street. You can see the railroad crossing down in there. Here's the Delaware and Hudson railroad crossing. And, the guy in the tower is posing. These were all hand-operated gates. And there's another crossing down there in the back. That's the D&H. Jersey Central is behind me. And there's the end of the line after the 1909 cutback. And there was no connection. There was never a connection here. I can see the Jersey Central gates right up here behind my car. One of the two railroads they had so much fighting with. Here's the Hudson line. That'll come out River Street in Maffitt Street and Cary Avenue. And this is that location where those two kids were standing. They'll continue to turn down on Stark and Oak and Minor Street. This was where the loop was going to be. At one time, they wanted a loop this little distance. That was the private right-of-way down here by the bridge. They never did that. and Hudson will leave. And these are two cemeteries here, and behind and next to the cemeteries is the Dorrance Breaker of the Lehigh Valley Coal Company, all off to the right. And of course, the Dorrance Breaker was along the Susquehanna River and the Laurel Line. And here you can see that if you look at the cemetery, and there's River Street, and there's a car crossing Mill Creek, and underneath, it's going to go underneath the Wilkes-Barre Connecting Railroad, which several railroads used. Now, there's the Dorrance Breaker next to the cemeteries, just to the left of the cemeteries. And down below that, you have the Laurel Line on that bridge down below, and you have the Lehigh Valley Railroad down here, and a coal railroad. And the Lehigh Valley Bridge over Mill Creek, right on the edge of the picture, believe it or not the Lehigh Valley, the Laurel Line Bridge is still there. Okay. There. I got that thing again, Chris.
Yeah, I saw, but you fixed
Saw
it.
that. There, we've gone under the Wilkes-Barre Connecting Bridge, and there's a Pizza Hut over to my left. And if I turn around, there's the Laurel Line's Prospect Viaduct, the breaker of the Lehigh Valley Coal Company, called the Prospect Breaker. And I'm going to go over the Jersey Central and underneath the Laurel Line, and then go underneath the Laurel Line again. But first, I've got to get onto Maffett Street. And for years, I could see this station gradually crumbling. That is a major edifice on the Laurel Line, and that's how people stayed not warm, but dry at Maffett Street. Now you can't even see any of this. Can't see the steps, can't see any railings. It's all gone. Another sighting here at Amesbury Switch, Amesbury Avenue. And so they ran about every 20 to 30 minutes. Major business area, Main Street at Cary, and the cars going inbound. And all these buildings are 3 and 4 story tall apartments. Now, the end of the Plains line here. This is Cary Avenue at Hudson Road, and the car is going to turn, and the Plains line is right behind me. That was that location. You can still see the church there. Looks like they had a thaw like we're having. And Oak Street. The neighborhoods are changing. This line is going to end at the Delaware and Hudson Railroad yards, which are behind me. And he'll do his end change. But we're going to go north. These were interesting lines here. These were semi-interurban lines. They went north all the way up from Pittston through Duryea and Old Forge. If you ever get to Duryea, Kaminsky Kibasi is really good. You should try it. And they had the usual fights with councils and railroads and property owners. Finally, got up to Pittston. They had a fight going up on the east side of the Susquehanna into Pittston. Finally got up there in middle of 1894. A year later, they made it up to Duryea. And the Scranton Railway came down into Old Forge and crossed the Lackawanna River up here. And they would meet in the middle of the street. And they would pass an awful lot of mining, and the patch towns, as they call the crappy housing that surrounded these breakers. A lot of private right-of-way up here, and they went into Port Griffith. And this is, I believe, number 14, Colliery. Port Griffith is famous for the Knox mine disaster. Some miners were digging too close to the Susquehanna River, had about 1.5 feet of rock and a swollen river. They found out later the mob was involved with this and corrupt inspectors. It was not one of the major coal companies at that point. It was leased from one of the major coal companies. And the water came in, and they did get to save 63 that found their way out, but 12 were still down there, still entombed. And it flooded all of the mines, which were interconnected. And then rolling into the street here in Port Griffith. It was 1959, I believe. I just saw in Scranton last week a beautiful documentary of that. But it essentially shut down all the mining up here. And maybe the coal companies were happy because they weren't doing very well anyway. Here is Pittston at North Main Street. And it was a very busy town. And the line's going to keep going. We're north of Pittston now. This is the D&W Railroad building a new overpass. That was a typical car used in Wilkes-Barre. Duryea was the end of the line, but you had to go through all of Duryea first to get to the Scranton Railway connection. That was the north end of Duryea. And this is pretty much where the line ended. That's the D&W Railroad over on my left. And right behind the car, you might see a Scranton Railway car because you had to get off. At one time, the line was projected to go from Old Forge into Scranton, and Scranton Railway thwarted them by building down to Taylor and Old Forge first. They had a line cutting off this line, going up a hill to McAlpin Street. And this was Ed Miller's, Ed took a picture up here as well. This one is Michael Lavelle, but Ed took one of his first pictures here. Ed Miller, photographer. We have much of his collection now. We're going to cross the Susquehanna River and Bennett Street. You're going to come, of course, across Market. And this little loop here was the Kingston line. We don't have much about that. All the way up to Pittston, all the way off here is going to be a very long, busy double track line. The line to Bennett Street to Courtdale will accommodate the Harvey's Lake line, and we're going to head across the Kingston Flats. This area, according to newspapers, was dotted with what locally was called a pond hole, where I guess people could ice skate when the brigands weren't out. The area, this whole Kingston Flats area, was considered a very dangerous place at night in the 1800s. There's the car barn down there, and a couple shots of the barn, shots of the old heavy equipment. And no wonder they would buy equipment from places like Eastern Pennsylvania Railways and Asbury Park. And there's that private right-of-way in the middle. And probably the car barn's presence meant that they had to rebuild the tracks here. And this was the main shop and barn of Wilkes-Barre Railways. There's number 4, a Harvey's Lake car, and you can see the sweepers over here to the right. Much of the car fleet seems to have come from, the Eastern Pennsylvania Railways, and we'll head north. I'm shooting from that railway bridge, the Wilkes-Barre connecting bridge, up in this private right-of-way. Well, it's paved now, but we're still looking west and north. And you can see all the way up Market Street at one time, they had a considerable private right-of-way. And this was a postcard I happened to find at eBay that nobody wanted, and I'm happy. It shows some of the original early equipment. Kingston Corners is this. We were right. Kingston Corners was behind me in the last shot. And this is looking down Wyoming Avenue, really major street there. If you wanted to go to Edwardsville or Larksville, you're going to head left. But we're going to go north. And Kingston was this little loop here. It didn't go around too many blocks. But that's where the first horse car line went, because the D&W Railroad was here and its depot was here. Okay. And they began electric service in 1892. They would go to Edwardsville, I think also in 1892. The Harvey's Lake line opened about 1911 or 12. And so this is the only 2 pictures I've ever seen of the loop. Ed Miller took these, and in both cases, the cars were laying over. This is where it just looped for about 5 blocks on Wyoming Avenue. Then it went up 4 blocks or 5 blocks, and then it went back a couple of blocks. But part of this was the original horse car line serving the station. Now, the trolleys disappeared on this loop in 1937. This was the long line, though, all the way up from Kingston through 40 Fort. 40 Fort, famous for the Wyoming Massacre. The Stone Bridge was up here. It always flooded up here. Exeter, West Pittston. This was West Pittston. And finally, crossing a bridge, Jenkins Bridge, the Fort Jenkins Bridge, actually, into Pittston. It was a beautiful postcard. February 1892, two cars ran as far as the Exeter line. And so they're heading north. Nice dirt street. Safety islands were put in. Okay. This was West Pittston. And they reached West Pittston the day before my birthday on 1892. And they couldn't really open the line because they had a car shortage, though, until a month later. And they would eventually get into Pittston at the late date of May 21, 1926. And there were a lot of cutbacks on this line to not everything went up to West Pittston and to Pittston. And they're putting in new safety islands. And this was about 1924 or 25. If you remember, the safety islands were only there for about 15 years because we had a picture showing those safety islands being taken out about 1940. And they did, as I said, have cutbacks. The Luzerne line operated for a bit here, but it cut off. So it never really was effective in taking up some of the slack of this very heavy line. So you cut back cars at the Stone Bridge, at the airport was a major cutback point. In fact, that would be called, the cutbacks at the airport would be called 44th service. And it had its own destination. Here was 1924 and the start of the Depression. And they're continuing constantly to work on these schedules to try to get enough extra cars to be where they needed to be, to try to get a half decent headway. Eventually wound up with a 20-minute headway on this line. This is 1938. A lot of single track here as you get up towards the Exeter and West Pittston operation. And they reorganized it during the Depression. They're trying to get 15-minute service on the inner part of the line, 30-minute service on the outer part of the line. They go back and forth on 20-minute headways. And until the trackless trolleys show up, this will be a continuing problem of trying to get the headways set up enough to accommodate the very busy ridership here. We're crossing the D&W right here on a double track section of Wyoming Avenue. And there's Bennett Street, where the cars to Luzerne and Courtdale are going to turn off. And then some of the new safety islands with a checkered pattern to try to keep errant motorists from striking them. I'm sure quite a few did. And but this was a very densely populated line. You're going to have a section as you approach the airport of private right-of-way at Denison Street, and we're near the cutback point at 44th. The airport's over on my right. So this private right-of-way is beautiful, running beautifully in the middle. Denison Cemetery was named for Nathan Denison. He was a Connecticut person. You have to remember Pennsylvania and Connecticut both fought over this area throughout the 1700s. And during the Revolution, when the British brought a large force of Indians and troops down there, Denison led the militia into what became known as the Wyoming Massacre. And quite a few of the militia were killed. Now, this interesting crossing must have presented a lot of problems as traffic increased. We're down by the airport, as you can see. Nice overall view of it. I think it's around Terrace Street. Here's the crossover where 44 cars will turn back and less service will run farther north. And we're looking southbound or inbound right now. Back onto the street. We're not too far from the Wyoming Monument. This was the area that the battle or massacre took place. And now we're in Wyoming, another one of the towns there. They all had their little business districts. Churches lined the place. Typical bridge closure up there. Floods on the Susquehanna every year created a lot of problems with the area. There's another mine complex. Luzerne Avenue. This looks like last week's weather, doesn't it? Little movie theaters everywhere. And finally, behind me is the Fort Jenkins Bridge. There was a small fort on either side of the river, and these were probably nothing more than fortified cabins. When we say fort and we're out here in the colonial era, that's really what we're looking at. None of the big palisaded forts you see in a movie like the Drums Along the Mohawk. Here's the Fort Jenkins Bridge, which opened in 1926 and allowed the cars to actually get into downtown Pittston. Lehigh Beef in Wilkes-Barre was a customer of the Laurel Line. Now we're looking down the main street of Pittston. And when you go down here today, part of this is not here anymore. They've made this one way north. There's another road along the river on the old Lehigh Valley Railroad that's one way south. And a lot of these buildings no longer serve a purpose. But it was a very busy town at one time. And the Laurel Line, beside its major brick stations in Wilkes-Barre and in Scranton, this was the town that had a regular station and also a brick freight house. Very, very busy place. And here is the Laurel Line, because we've got to put the Laurel Line in all my shows, as I've said. And this is at Oak Street. And southbound Laurel Line cars are going to my left. This car is going north, but outbound, or south, but outbound. They're going to run through the business district and through a bit of a residentialist district, and they're going to end here, change ends, pull up, seats flipped and all that, at Swallow Street. And here's the end. They would cut off service into Pittston and Exeter and everywhere north of Exeter, and the trolleys would run along with trackless trolleys and sometimes buses for about a month after that service was abandoned north of here. And finally, you would have complete trackless trolley replacement at the end of January 1940. Luzerne was a short line. And here we are coming out Wyoming and up Bennett Street. And it was not an easy line it wasn't an easy line to put in. They had to keep piecing extensions onto it until 1906, even though they tried to open it in 1889. They had trouble with the DL&W Railroad. They had trouble with the Lehigh Valley crossings on Bennett Street. And then they had a fight with the borough. And they had a fight trying to get into Public Square. So these things are never done easily up in the Wilkes-Barre area. But here we are heading out Bennett Street. And it's a single track line. And, all the food stores like A&P were nothing more than these tiny little storefronts. None of the big areas with parking lots all over it. And we're approaching the crossing of the DL&W, and this would have to happen every so often. And because the DL&W was here first, the Wilkes-Barre Railways had to take on the responsibility of maintaining the crossing, and that's what we have here. And we're looking west, the other shot of the crossing. I've tried to sharpen it up, but don't work. Typical means of travel on your right, bicycles on the sidewalk. You were allowed to ride on a sidewalk, and plenty of drugstore, American stores. I'll have to check that out, but to find out what that was, whether it was a chain or not. And we're on Bennett Street at Main Avenue and Chapel. There's their business district, and it was, quite substantial for a small town, so close to downtown Wilkes-Barre. They had metal plates on the front of the cars to designate a destination. It was probably very helpful for the immigrants there that could not speak English, but could see either the color of the plate or the letters on the plate and knew that was the way I wanted to get home. We're crossing Toby's Creek, and we get a little bit more suburban out here as we get into Courtdale. The last service out here was in April of 1939, and again, a typical ending for that line. However, and then I got this. We have Red Arrow Senator cars here, and I know the Lehigh Valley tried these, the Lehigh Valley Transit, and Wilkes-Barre had a few of these too. and they're very rare. It's the only picture I've ever seen of them. And they operated between 1914 and 1930. I think the order was 6 cars from Brill, and they do look like Red Arrow Senators. And they were bought by a dummy company. We've talked about those, the Wilkes-Barre and Hanover Street Railway, and they were always on Luzerne and 44th. They never put them anywhere else, and these were obsolete cars when they bought them, and eventually were stored in a car barn in East Dallas, and were scrapped during the Depression in the mid-30s. Now we're heading out on the Dallas line. This is a fan trip. And what is it? Well, there was this place called Harvey's Lake, really, really pretty lake. And it was in the borough of Harvey's Lake. It's a natural lake of nearly a square mile. And it was pretty much by surface area, the state's second largest lake. And, it was an amusement area. And you can see there was a hotel here, and there were steamboats and swimming. And it was the only line to leave the Wyoming Valley. John Reynolds, we had heard of him before, got a charter for the Luzerne, Dallas, and Harvey's Lake, and he wanted to connect his West Side line with the new lake. He envisioned a lot of traffic going up there. He had a deadline to begin construction, and so he did it in a typical way. He broke ground in front of a house of Burgess Parego, according to the paper, and he put in about 50 feet of track, and then he had then taken care of the legal niceties. So he said, we won't do any more work until the spring. It's November. I can see that long, here we are, the long Harvey's Lake line, is going to come out all the way through major towns like Dallas and Shavertown and Trucksville and Birch Grove. And it was a very suburban line. Today, there's a highway going through here, but some of the line is a walking trail. They had trouble with a fellow named Albert Lewis. He had land rights there, and of course, it didn't help that he was part of the Wilkes-Barre and Harvey's Lake Railroad, which was a branch of the Lehigh Valley Railroad, which essentially paralleled the line. It was very mountainous out there. And so the charter that was obtained by Reynolds was a steam railroad charter, because under Pennsylvania state law, steam railroads all had the right of eminent domain and can do any darn thing they wanted to do. And they condemned all the recalcitrant landowners, and they got their line in there. But Reynolds still had intentions to build an electric line. So he makes a contract, his Luzerne, Dallas, and Harvey's Lake makes a contract with Wilkes-Barre Traction Company, and they could run their cars to Public Square, and then the Luzerne, Dallas, and Harvey's Lake rights were reassigned to the Wilkes-Barre Northern, which bought all of the Luzerne, Dallas, and Harvey Lake property in July of 1896. So you can see the politics going on. Part of that's a walking trail today. 1896, already there's financial trouble. Construction costs are huge, and you can see why, trying to cut your way through this. Sometimes there was solid rock. They had to maintain a fiction of building a steam railroad, so they had the expense of building fake grades that would be suitable for steam power. So they had basically 2% grades, and they were using a lot of fill to build this. So and they had locomotives and some passenger coaches. There were 2 coaches and a baggage combine, and they came from Jackson and Sharp, 3 different locomotives, and the operations were able to begin in December of 1897, toward the middle of December. And some passenger traffic starts running on the 21st of December. Well, things didn't go real well out there. They pulled the engine. The engines pulled the cars up to Harvey's Lake until this happened. Coupler broke, and the brakes on the steam engine, of course, when the cars are releasing, weren't working. There was no air brakes, And apparently, so many accidents you read about. Well, the handbrake chain's not working, and the car wasn't able to be stopped, and it careened 5 miles or thereabouts down in a Luzerne borough, and it ran head on into a Luzerne streetcar. And the trolley was whipped into the side of a house, and at least one passenger was killed, and many, many more were injured. So, there's local legend after that, but there is one picture that shows from then on the locomotives pushing the cars up the hill. Now they electrify it, 1891, and they begin operating the Wilkes-Barre Northern operates over the traction company's tracks from Luzerne into Public Square, and the trains are still running beyond Public Square. There were 6 trains a day operating up to Dallas, and the cost was 15 cents. Wow, from Dallas to Luzerne, and 20 cents to get into Public Square. A lot of postcards shows the equipment here. And the railroad worked to complete the line north of Dallas. They now have 7 new steam trailers from Jackson and Sharp, and they're towed by locomotives to Luzerne. And again, motor cars pull the passenger cars into Public Square. They get up to Idetown in June 13th, 1897. Finally get up to Harvey's Lake in June 30th, 1897. Here's a couple of nice postcard views of what the electric line looked. It was running in the rail in the red. This part of the line beyond Courtdale was not electrified, and there was a fellow named John Graham, general manager of the Wyoming Valley Traction, some other people. They decide to form a committee of trustees, bankrupt system, and they do that in February of 1897. Reynolds resigns as president to immediately be replaced by Graham. The bond interest isn't paid in July, and the line is foreclosed. It's sold in August to the bondholders. They reorganize it as the Wilkes-Barre, Dallas, and Harvey's Lake Railway. And the first recorded dated electric operation is December 22nd, 1898. And you can see some of the equipment that's running out there. Look at all the fill that they had to work on. Now, the cars are running on heavily congested Main Street. They're running with other traffic. They're running with local streetcars that obviously have to stop, pick up, and get starting. So they want to build a line around all of this. And they get new financing when Wilkes-Barre Railways is established. So they charter another railway, the Wilkes-Barre and Luzerne Street Railway, in November of 1909. They're going to build a bypass. And there's another shot at the end of the line at Courtdale, Luzerne. And this is what they wind up building in 1911 and 1912. All private right-of-way, completely bypassing any of the street traffic. And they cut 10 or 12 minutes off the schedule. And so you could reach the lake, Harvey's Lake, in under an hour. They build it from Division Street in Kingston. They do this private right-of-way. They link it up with that iron bridge that we saw at Toby's Creek. They have to go under D.L.N.W. There was some delay in constructing the underpass in the background. The first test car runs August 1st, 1912. August 5th is the formal opening, and August 6th is when regular service begins. And it's quite an interesting line. There's the D.L.N.W. A lot of private right-of-way on this, and a lot of photos shot during the end of the line about 1939. But they did a lot of investment. This is shot from the D.L.N.W., and we're looking west, Railroad Avenue. We're still in Kingston. Now we're at the, that's Toby's Creek. We're along Toby's Creek, by the way. There's Toby's Creek Bridge. You can see it was extensively built. It was quite an interesting line. This is Pringle, just north of Kingston. The Lehigh Valley had to be crossed as well. There's the protective nets to keep the pole on. If the pole was to fall off, it would keep it electrified. what's called Luzerne Junction. And here's the connection. Here's the short line coming in along Mill Street. This is Luzerne Junction right here on Main Street. That's a little spur. I have no idea why Courtdale Avenue has a spur. There was an old car barn up here, and we're going to continue on to the left out to Harvey's Lake. And although many cars, by the time pictures were taken here, were only running to Dallas. This is Birch Grove. And because of the difficulty in getting through, there was no double track contemplated here. The end of double track right now at Birch Grove. That arch disappeared. I think it was Harris Hill. That just disappeared in the last 10 years. Shavertown Station. That's Toby's Creek over on the right. We're in Kingston Township now. I think the new highway runs through here, if I'm not mistaken. Now, they had a track, the Mount Greenwood Cemetery is off to the side there. They had a track to go into Mount Greenwood. And also, I think there was a St. Nicholas Cemetery, and they tore those tracks up in the 30s, 31, 33. They did provide some baggage car service to the lake for picnics, 1 year only on 1915. They ran trailers up here as far as Mount Greenwood till about 1918. And Mount Greenwood will figure in a bit later. They served the park. Fernbrook Park was up here, amazingly on the grounds owned by Reynolds. And this woman, a teacher, Mary Hawley, won $5 gold piece prize because she named the park. Park opened June 26th, 1897. It would be there after the streetcars left the area. So now notice how close the Lehigh Valley Railroad is. You can see why they did not want the trolley competition. They did run passenger service up here. They had double wire, so they did not need frogs at the switches. And that's really shows you the parallel Lehigh Valley Railroad here. That's East Dallas. There was a small car barn at East Dallas. And it was basically used for storing equipment that was somewhat unwanted. All the junk went to East Dallas. But quite a line to run around and photograph on. Now we'll get to Dallas itself. And a lot of cars would cut back here. You know, I mean, let's face it, Harvey's Lake would probably have about 4 months of heavy traffic. Nobody goes to the winter. They did try to run hourly service, and that didn't quite work, you know. But in the meantime, they ran half-hour service here to Dallas, and there was a long layover, 40 minutes. But instead of running up to the park, but they saved the power costs. But boy, imagine a job where you can sit on your butt for 40 minutes each time you got to the end of the line. This area's population did grow. While the lake business naturally fell with the automobile competition. So, you know, first they cut the line back from Harvey's Lake to Idetown north of here. They closed the substation up there. They started running a bus, and it was a real tight schedule from what I understand. It was 40 minutes and there was like no time at all. But by 1931, all the trolleys terminated here. And they were able to do better, have better scheduling. Here's the terminal at Harvey's Lake. And that's what it looked like. And you walk down the hill to the right, and there's Idetown, which had a terminal. They ran alternate cars to Idetown and then terminated all the cars to Dallas. They didn't tear anything up. And in the mid-30s, they had special cars carrying WPA workers coming up here. And there was a subsidiary, Wyoming Valley Autobus Company, leased the bus line to a local guy, a road, and his son ran the bus for a couple of times, a little while, but never made any money. Then they wound up discontinuing the short line because of a planned highway project. And this, they already knew by now they were going to get out of the trolley business up here September 25, 38. They do that discontinuance. They run over the original line, fighting all the traffic until next spring. And finally, in April of 39, they stop all the service on the Harvey's Lake Dallas line and actually the Luzerne, and it did have some spectacular wrecks. This one was September of 1914, when a superintendent was killed. He offered to motor the car, and while the regular operator, could eat his lunch, and the car was hauling a trailer, I believe. Oh, it hit a motor car that was hauling a trailer, and it was full of stone. So this head on what happened, and it was pretty bad. And it happened at Hayes Siding, between Hayes Siding and Dallas. Then there was this. How would you like to have this happen on the last day of service? And it did, just like at the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, motorists are fools. And this one ran in front of and then got piled on top of by this car in April of 30. That was the last day of service, and it was at the crossing at Mount Greenwood Cemetery. And it was a real mess. And there's some other photos out here that show all kinds of work cars in there. Now we'll go up Edwardsville, and that is a line that runs up here, across the Market Street Bridge. It'll leave Kingston Corners up Main Street and down Church, and look at all the private right-of-way in there. And then it'll head partway down the Main Street in Kingston, and we'll leave Kingston Corners. And we are going to turn off onto Main Street from Market Street. Here's your typical small industry there. All these cars seem to be Eastern Pennsylvania Railway cars. That's the D&W Railroad blocking the trolley's progress for a while. And the D&W ran up and down the Susquehanna River just in from the main street. So Edwardsville had a nice business district here. And we're going to run looking west through that business district. And then we'll turn off at Church Street. And I don't know if it was named for the church there. So don't ask, please don't ask me there. But you're going to run about 6 or 7 blocks. And all of a sudden you get into mining country, and you can see it starting to happen. Van Trip car. One of the old cars that was left. There were only 2 or 3, usually used in work service, but they were popular Van Trip cars in the end. And the Edwardsville car is going to run through parts of Larksville, so that's why I have that there. And this is 1939 Sheridan Switch. Pretty barren out here, because, as I said, we're going to be running through lightly populated areas because of the coal mines. This was the Laurie Colliery, the powerhouse, the mine, the breaker is off to the left. And this was a major operation, but it did provide some business for the trolley company. And there's the column dump. Look at all the devastation here, by the way, but look at all the mine refuse piled up on the right. We go along East Main Street at Nesbitt Street, and there's a better shot of it, a little closer. Private right-of-way, side of the road running. As you can see, there's the Laurie Colliery. Laurie was a president of the Delaware and Hudson Railroad, and we'll get on to the main street. One of the rare color photos of Wilkes-Barre, and that is the Lance Colliery. So you can see right there, there's a shaft going down. As I look west, there's past the Lance Colliery, and when we're now at the East Main Street Bridge in Plymouth. That's the track heading off to it. And now there was a lot of flooding in Plymouth. It was low enough, the Susquehanna River, and there was another creek in there too. This was called Bull Run's Crossing. There had been a D&H railroad crossing here, and it was low ground. Browns Creek, I think, is the creek that tended to do this nasty work. And over to my right, as we'll see in a little bit, is the Larksville terminus. They never went down. The Larksville cars never went down, but the Edwards cars did go down the main street in Plymouth. And there's the high school, the Edwardsville High School. This line would end in August. Now, if the other way to leave that turnoff at Church, Larksville was a much more populated area, and it had some interesting private right-of-way. And so, and Rigg had started this operation. John Rigg from the syndicate had started the Plymouth and Larksville Railway. He chartered that in May of 1901. He put Abram Nesbitt in charge. A lot of local money, local contractor. It opened up at the end of 1901, and they pretty much operated it separately as an appendage of the Wilkes-Barre and Wyoming Valley Traction Company. This line bought power from the traction company. The cars were stored and maintained at the barn, and the two lines agreed to accept transfers, and any repairs were made at cost plus 10%. So, and I love the gas price, 15.5 cents. Might even be cheaper than eggs. And they had to go across the DL&W Railroad, and of course they had to maintain it. I love that guy with the pole pushing the wire up. Another shot of the crossing. This railroad operated passenger trains from Scranton because a lot of its mines were located along the route. They also served the business district. This is west of Church Street. And passing sightings. This was a high area. This and the Heights, Georgetown, were places where trolleys and buses were stored during extreme floods, like the 1936 flood. That church is closed now. It's a Slovak church. Look at the above the houses. Look at all that column waste from the mining down there. Wilson Street. Maybe somebody is just, maybe those people have just gotten off the car. It's narrow up here. It's a little bit up and down. And, but we're going to get up to Polk Hollow. Polk Hollow is on East State Street. Nesbitt Street's coming off to my right. And all the fan trips stopped here, as this one is at Polk Hollow. And you look down and it was all mining refuge. If you went off to the left, there was really no street there. And today there's a street that's very steep. So private right-of-way was used to descend into this anthracite mess. And that's the famous photo that everybody has shown. For some reason, that pole was used, even though the maintenance on the system was very, very good. So you can see the grade of the car. Look at all the mine refuse back there. That would be strip mine. That would later be mined. And of course, no paint on the houses. Why would you do it? By the time you paint it, side number 4, side number 1 was lacking paint again. So it was an interesting piece of right-of-way, and everybody shot it from this end. Nobody shot it out here over the where it comes out onto the road again, Brown Street, I think it is. In fact, most of those houses on the left are not there anymore, but it's going to come out. And it's getting onto State Street now, but there is no State Street going back right now. So this is why it had to go around it, and it's going to parallel and then cross the Delaware and Hudson. This is now paved Washington Street, but here it was not paved, and it wound up running here. Here's the track on the right from that Edwardsville car, and this is where the car terminated. And there was more people riding on this line. They never took it into any farther than here at Bull Run Crossing in Pittston. The Ashley line coming out here, and you can see it coming off Main Street and into Ashley down here, and then Sugar Notch, and it will terminate just across the boundary from Sugar Notch into Warriors Run. And here we are coming out along the old Colville horse car line. And of course, the trial trip here was December 3rd, 1892. Horse over there on the left, cop on a horse. And this was the South Street Bridge. And it had been closed for a while and finally reopened. The Ashley car, as we said before, is going to come back after being abandoned. It was abandoned and then abandoned again on September 7th, 1946. And we had a mix of double track in Ashley. This is one of the Philadelphia Railways cars. It's not a Hog Island car, as people sometimes say, and it's out at Hazel Street. This was built for Philadelphia Railway to serve Hog Island Shipyard. And after that, they couldn't buy them. So everybody got them at bargain basement prices. This car is from Asbury Park, another fairly new car that was purchased. And it was a nice area, as you can see. A mix of houses, small stores. There's the Ashley crossing again, so we don't have to say too much about it. But it is a significant part of the, that was the Jersey Central Railroad. Now we've got a coal breaker, the Huber breaker, over on my left. And the Huber breaker, long after it stopped running, the Huber was being saved by a volunteer group, who hoped the state would start a mining museum there and do the breaker upright, and they didn't. So about 8 years ago, it was torn down. There's one of the big dumps. I don't see any evidence of it burning yet. A lot of private right-of-way going out here, and you can see the Huber breaker right up above the snow bank on the left, and a lot of nice private right-of-way. It's desolate. This mining was desolate. It desolated the area. It decimated the view. But a lot of private right-of-way, passing sighting. And finally, I'll get back on the street at Main Street. And I'm in Hanover Township. And I am entering Sugar Notch, which was a pleasant little town. Brick Street. You see the difference in housing, when you're out here in Pittsburgh. It's very, very different, very big. The church has been knocked down, I believe, now. And finally, you'll get just cross the border into Warrior Run. No attempt was made to go any farther than this. We're up on the hill. We're getting toward the end, but we're up on the hill here. See where it says Heights and Georgetown. Now, these two lines, one disappeared before the war, one after the war. Georgetown first started running in 1895, and they couldn't get up this big high hill. They couldn't get over all the railroad yards, 3 sets of railroad tracks and associated yard tracks were there. So they had to go all the way in South Wilkes-Barre and across the South Street Bridge and the bridge that was there before that to get up into the Heights. It was very circuitous. A lot of people decided we just walk across the tracks and up a hill. They built this trestle, opened up in October of 1896. Now you had a direct route up on the hills up east of Wilkes-Barre, and that is the Laurel Line Terminal over on the left, and we're going to go up this over the Lehigh Valley Railroad. Railroad fans love this because it's a interesting paint scheme on the early switchers, and but you can see all the railroad tracks that made it so difficult for the trolley to get over here. And then the hill, there's the room I should have, right? This trolley rumbling by every 10 minutes. Don't tell my wife. And you'll get off the trestle around Cole Street, North Wells. And now you can see that hill that you're climbing. It's East Market Street at Meade. And it's going to loop around a little bit, and we'll have passing sightings. And both the Heights cars and the Georgetown cars use this trestle, and there was some common trackage. Pardon me. And now we're off to common trackage. And you can see the lack of paint on so many of these buildings. And that's all from the sulfur in the air. There is a derail here, as you can see, and apparently at least one car had to use it. As we continue to climb the hill. Northampton Street at Spencer. And the Orthodox Church, so common out there, Orthodox churches with the dome. Whether it's Ukrainian or Russian or Slovakian, I don't know. Finally, the end of the line at the Jersey Central. And you can see down in that little dip down there was where the car originally laid over. Heights was not a very big line. We got 2 shots from it. It came across the trestle as well and went over Hancock and up Northampton and South Street and Park Avenue. And then it came back over the South Street Bridge. And it was your typical neighborhood here, just like Georgetown. Started in September of 1895 and it was part of the Georgetown service, but became its own line when the viaduct opened. And that was October 28th, 1896, cut off from the Georgetown line and, came in on the South Street Bridge, and it was pretty tight up there, as you can see. Now, trackless was sent up here. Buses served this in World War II. Trackless came up here in January of 1948. You'd have about 10 years of trackless operation, and it disappeared in September of 1958. Very tight curve up here. Grove Brown, another line that wasn't well shot, but it's a weird thing because it came out of Public Square on Main Street and up on Hazel Avenue. Now, then you changed ends here and you had a backup and over High Street and Grove, Stanton and Brown Street. This site was Mill Hill, I think, up here. The problem was the grade coming up the hill and the proximity of the railroad right next to the backup. So Rolling Mill Hill, that's what it was. So, we're sitting here and they would have to back up. The car comes up and they have to change ends to go back. There's the railroad crossing and the car, you can see the closest railroad crossing. There are 2 here. And the car's just come out of Grove Brown and it's going to have to do 2 things. It's going to have to change ends and then it's going to have to wait for the outbound car to come and change ends. When the outbound car leaves to go back to Grove and Brown Streets, this car can head into downtown Wilkes-Barre. This was originally a branch off for a car barn, I believe. And here are both cars doing their end change. And then Grove Brown car will take off to the right. And you can see just how close the railroad was and how difficult it would have been to try to put a curve in there. And there he goes. He's going outbound with a pretty good load. Now, the building on the right, I believe, was the former horse car barn for the Colville line. And then the end of the line was your typical neighborhood. And the operator's going to do his thing. And but we're going to go down to Plymouth via Cary Avenue. Another very interesting line. And it goes through South Wilkes-Barre, just like the Nanticoke line. South Wilkes-Barre, South Main Street, very densely populated area. It's going to go down Hanover and Cary Avenue and then this private right-of-way, some of which is still evident, and it'll cross over here by Richards Island and get into Plymouth and end at Bull Run Crossing. I mean, here we are again, as I said, a very densely populated area. So you had some heavy with Plymouth via Cary, and with Nanticoke, you had some pretty heavy service. In fact, this is one of 2 lines that had all-night service. Plymouth, Cary Avenue, and Nanticoke had all-night service. You had across numerous railroads. Pennsylvania Railroad was down in here, and they had the protections, of course, for the. Now we'll get on the private right-of-way, and if you drive that today, the railroad bridge is still there, and you could see the private right-of-way. The bridge, in fact, has a pillar in the middle behind those posts. And it's clearly evident where the right-of-way was. This is 1941. Oh, yeah, you can see all of this. I'm looking east right now. Some cars came out of South Wilkes-Barre and terminated here. Look at that magnificent private right-of-way. Yeah. There are more houses, of course, built here, but it's very evident. You can tell. This is the Breslau section of Wilkes-Barre, Hanover Township. Some cars did cut back here, and whenever the bridge that we're going to see was closed, they all cut back here. Now, that track went off to the side, and there was Pennsylvania Railroad track that connected, excuse me, with it. And also down along the river, which is just beyond the car, the Wilkes-Barre Railways was able to grab a lot of coal that floated down, coal silt, and they were able to burn it in their power plant. And we'll have this beautiful bridge, like the Smithfield Street Bridge. They had their own track along the side, and that's the Lance Colliery on the other side in Plymouth. So it's an inbound car. And people seem to not care whether this is typical, flood stage almost. And you had all this heavy rain. You got a lot of water, and people are just walking across, and it didn't matter. There's their work car on the other side of the bridge, doing some work. And the electric company on the island over there, Richards Island. And I'll turn onto the main street, and I will join the Edwardsville cars, or turn off in this case. Here's the West Cherry Street at Bull Run. So the Larksville cars are laying over to my right. You can see the track, the D&H track going up to the colliery, the Lurie Colliery up there. And this is the shot Kristen used, with a lot going on, as you can see. I think that's a fan trip because it says NRHS, and they're out there messing around with the switch. The Larksville cars did go all the way down through Plymouth on a Sunday. And Plymouth was a rather busy town. The Avondale breaker was located in Plymouth, and it was one of the early notable mine disasters. They had built the coal breaker directly under the shaft, under the mine shaft, and it gets into a lot of union politics. Irish miners and Welsh miners had both been on strike, and Welsh miners had come back to work. And it's still contemplated that the Irish miners might have set a fire in the mine, because most of them were off for a wedding, amazingly. And over 100 people were suffocated because the breaker was on top of the shaft. And some of the first state mining laws required the coal breakers to never be built over the shaft again. And we're heading toward the end of Plymouth, flat road. That's got that sidewalk is still there. That's an East Penn car. One of the first two of the East Penn 700 series cars. They were in the 300 series at Pottsville, and they looked a lot more like the Reading cars in the ends. The other ones would have rounded ends. And they're turning back right now because of flooding, piping. But there's some color shots. You don't see very many color shots in 1950. And finally, you're at the end of the line, or near the end of the line. It was at the Borough line. But the Nanticoke line was the last one to run, Nanticoke and Hanover. And it would leave Plymouth, it would leave Public Square. It used about 20 miles of track. It had private right-of-way. They had to have 12 cars to serve Nanticoke, and it's down in South Wilkes-Barre as well. And so South Wilkes-Barre is out here, and it's going to continue straight south on Lee Park Avenue, and a lot of, as you can see, private right-of-way along River Road till it gets to Nanticoke, which is a separate town. And I guess it passes one of its former buddies, which is now being used as a diner at Dana Street. It's on South Main Avenue. And we'll turn on the Lee Park and Division Street. There was abandoned track here from other routings at one time down here through South Wilkes-Barre, and a crossing now on the Pennsylvania Railroad. Penn State came up from the south, from Sunbury, and we're leaving private right-of-way, St. Mary's Road, Lee Park Avenue. Same location, much wider view, 1939. And I grabbed this overhead photo. Here's Lee Park in St. Mary's. There's a cemetery over here, St. Mary's Cemetery. Here's the private right-of-way running through some housing here, and down on its own private right-of-way, this mining country. Then it's a golf course today. It's near Inman and Savelli Streets, I believe. And there's some good views of it. And you can see the mine refuse covered with snow. And some of the older homes. There's a lot more homes here now. All this area here is covered in homes and the golf course. And we're looking west down here. Cars going south, north, and south, but we're looking west. And you saw the pipe on the left. This pipe is a mining railroad here, and you can see the overhead. So the mining trains are being pulled by electric locomotives. It's well-maintained track, and it was pretty much like this right to the end. You really can't walk through here anymore. You can't see anything here. I thought this was kind of cool. Here's their line car train. It's a flat car with a wooden tower, a little four-wheel passenger car with also a tower, and a guy on each pole. So a little symmetry in the picture. Loomis Street and Division Street. I've been able to drive on that road. It's still there. The wall is still there. It's a 4-lane highway now, and there's certainly a lot more here, but the homes are there and the wall is there. And you're going to rumble down here near Diamond Street, which I think is up on the left. And oh, now you can see this. You clearly can see where this is when you go there, because the house is still there. And there's Sansui. Sansui, this is at Ashley Street, and Sansui was a park. The park is on my left. You can see some of the roller coaster that's there, and I'm looking south. And the Hanover branch is going to cut off here, and this substation is still there on the left side of the 4-lane highway, so you could tell where it was. Rail service would end in October. Now, Sansui of 1950. Sansui is right up here at the top of the hill, and we're going to roll down what is now a highway, and we're going to get down to the Loomis Breaker, the Truesdale Breaker down here. That's the Dale and W Railroad, crossing over to reach some of its coal breakers on this side. And I think it was the Loomis Colliery that was close to it. So that was a classic. That's a road over on the left, but there's the trolley coming down to the right. These roads divide here today. You can tell exactly what this was here. This area washed out about 1947, and a lot of track was torn up and by the floods. And everybody thought, well, this will make a super duper highway. They'll get rid of the trolleys, but they did not get rid of the trolleys. We're looking north. The Loomis Breaker is off to my right, and there's some of that construction work there's a ton of pictures on the washouts that were here. There was a big flood in August along River Road. And Loomis tell us all the debris, the detritus is still there. But I'm heading south along River Road, and I'm heading towards Dundee Crossing, which is down there in the back. This is Dundee Cross Road here, and I don't think these houses are there anymore when I look, but there's a lot of other stuff that has replaced it. Now, this interesting thing, they had a washout here at one point in the 30s and late 30s, I believe, and instead of filling this all up, they just put a gauntlet track in here and 2 wires. Now I'll cut off the main road. I've crossed Old River Road at Black Creek. I'm going to go behind these houses. I'm going to go along the Pennsylvania Railroad, which you see over there on the right. Go about 2.5 blocks. And I will, this building is still here. You could totally see this at Mills Corners where the track is coming out. And downtown Nanticoke, before the big fire in that building on the right. Nanticoke is not nearly as built up now. A lot of this has changed, obviously, for the worse. This is where the cars originally ended and laid over. And you can see as automobile traffic increased, it was not the way to go. So they went to the left. You can sort of see that track in the snow, and they would unload on this track. You could put 2 or 3 tracks here. Though, please don't ask me what the honeypot bus is. I don't even want to contemplate that. This was near a colliery where you could see in the background, and actually behind one of those buildings on my right, there's a mine slope that goes right under the buildings. The tunnel is right behind the buildings. You don't have a backyard. Hanover is a real quick thing. It was put in when the Truesdale breaker opened up, and it never really went in and out of Wilkes-Barre. It usually ended here at what was known as Summit Station. And this is 1948, and it always changed ends here and came back, and it did help to serve Sansui. There's a crowd going into the park. Everybody happy. And there we are cutting off. The ERA trip is off to the side, as you can see, but it was a single track, 1 or 2 passing sightings. This fan trip used 390, which was a work car, a general utility car. And it was built to serve a mine. And if you walked across the street at the end of the line, this is in the middle. You'd find the Bower Street and Orchard. This was known as Ascom, and it's situated in Hanover Township. And you got about 2 blocks of track. You got off the private right away, and then you got back on it. Now 760. Here's the fan trip. Coming up, in 760 had been coming down the wrong way. They had a 760 had to change ends and go all the way back, to Summit Station to cross over to let the fan trip get through. Not very populated. There's a high school down in here now, I believe, but really good track work out here, particularly, for 1940 when they were running out of money. This photo has been shown before. Ed Miller climbed up on one of those calm dumps to get this shot. That's the Truesdale breaker, and that was named for President Truesdale of the D&W Railroad. It's now the Glen Alden Coal Company, which really was still associated with the D&W, but a law had been passed in Congress saying, if you mine it, you can't carry it. And many of the railroads then, did their own coal company, which had the same board of directors that burned down in 1953. The colliery fires were usually very spectacular. Wooden ones more so than the steel ones. That white area back there is probably the result of mine subsidence, and the track had to be rebuilt and built up. And we're at the end of the line. There's the Truesdale breaker. There's a Jersey Central train going by. And behind me is the People's Railway of Nanticoke. And until the 30s, I could get off, walk across, and go into Nanticoke, into downtown Nanticoke a different way. Well, bad things do happen. And as Dr. Cox told me one time, he got all the records of Wilkes-Barre Railways, and they were stored here in the car barn. And he has no idea where they were when the 1936 flood. This area was always a watery area till it was built up. Then you have the ice. The Susquehanna River would constantly, flood in the summer. In the wintertime, huge ice jams form because it was actually cold back then. It was like last week, all winter. And then you'd have all of this, and then the ice would break and flood, and then you had to come out with a whole bunch of guys and picks and shovels to open up the car line. And there's more of that work that was done by hand. These were called ice gorges back in this area. Well, we already saw the accident. There were many of them. Here are some cars burning. They took them to 2 different scrap yards. This was Cohen's down along the Pennsylvania Railroad, Fellow Street. And it was back down in that Breslau section of Plymouth. And all of these cars were burned. I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's the Shapiro scrapyard. And I put this in because, hey, it's color. and few Wilkes-Barre shots exist. All of these cars were destroyed except 790. They went to the Krakowskis. They were a couple that lived up in Rolling Mill, and they had a cottage up on the hill away from all the soot, and they wanted this body. They hauled it up to their property, and they built a roof over it and attached it to their cottage. And they were able to sit and look out the windows, look to the west, see beautiful sunsets. And the car stayed up there. It had a sun porch on it, and they just loved it up there. And then he died in the 70s, and she stayed there, and she died in the 90s. And then the property went to other family members. And volunteers, trolleybus knew about this, and they were able to work out a deal. And it was like, if you get rid of the whole cottage, you can have the trolley. Oh, okay, let's do it. And in the meantime, of course, all these utility wires had been put in. It took 2 cranes to hoist this out. And there were a couple people really pushing for this. And I think this came out about 5 years ago. And it went down to Exeter. It was trucked down to Exeter to the Bott Studios. Now, Conrad Bott was a gentleman who did a lot of brass work, and he did a lot of work for churches. And he put it in his building and was beginning restoration. And he passed away, unfortunately. He was doing this down in Swearsville. It's about 10 miles away from here. And his son has taken up the project, and I haven't been able to take another look at it for a couple of years now, but they've discovered paint underneath, and they're working on it. It's going to go to Scranton, but Scranton right now doesn't have the time to do the work. They don't have a space to do the work, but this car should go eventually to the Scranton Museum, and I know it's probably late, but that's what I have, and I'm ready for questions. I'm wide awake.
Awesome. Thank you, George. I am getting my presentation back up here. Thank you so much. If you want to take a minute while I tell people about what's coming up to read through some of the comments, you can do that. So let me bring this up. Okay, sorry, everybody. I'll let you unmute in just a minute here. Thanks for sticking around. We do these about once a month. So the next one will be February 25th, which will be, it's kind of confusing. It's part 1 of the Philadelphia Trackless Trolley PRT PTC years from Bob Wright. So he presented part 2 earlier. So it's like out of order chronologically. Part 1, which is actually part 2, will be February 25th. So you can watch part 1 or 2 on YouTube now. I mentioned earlier, March 8th, Volunteer Open House and Vintage Communications Weekend, March 15th and 16th. And then our other Trolleyology we have scheduled right now. New as of today, Dave Warner is going to come back and do a Pittsburgh program, 1 month and counting. It's October of 1971. So a few lines are in about to go away. So we'll get to see young Dave Warner's photos of Pittsburgh again, which will be very exciting. Okay, I want to thank everybody for joining us. We're going to get to questions here in just a second, but if you want to support the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum, you can go to patrolley.org/support. We always welcome members and volunteers and donors, and thank you again to those of you who did donate during the registration process for tonight. Okay. Let me make it so folks can unmute themselves. George, did you see any questions there that you wanted to?
I'm just starting to look at it, and it's snowing in Acton, Massachusetts. So I have to go down and
Lots of great comments. People are very grateful that you're doing these and that we're recording them so they can live online in perpetuity, and everybody can go watch them, whenever they want. So if you didn't get to read all of George's slides tonight, he had a lot of text on those. Those are kind of notes to help him. But when this is on YouTube, you can go pause that and read everything till your heart's content.
Kristen, the other thing is I'm thinking ahead, when I collect pictures, I'll give you an example. That show I did in Scranton last month, I probably had gone to Scranton 4 times and just took days running up and down the street trying to find out just where the hell it was. And, I'm one of these old guys that's still familiar with some of these areas. It's changing. What if somebody wants to view this program or do it for the museum and I'm not here? The text will help that person figure out where I was going with this.
Absolutely.
Hey, George,
Thinking ahead. Yeah.
I wanted to mention, besides saying thank you, before everybody leaves, and we had to wait here a while, that the Anthracite Trolley Group makes Christmas ornaments, which are just like all of the route signs on the
yeah.
Wilkes-Barre trolleys. So if you need a K
Right.
Kingston or an H Hanover or Georgetown G, all of those can be purchased from them. I was up there visiting them and saw the car, and I found out that they had all this stuff up in the office. So I bought one of all the signs and some other thing, and I've got one of the car signs from inside one of the cars that says "Spitting in this car is forbidden by law." They have a lot of interesting things. Conrad and it's two sons, by the way, they're twins,
Okay.
who are spearheading the restoration. And I saw the car, and this is a while ago. I know they had just gotten some material to put the floor back in the car because a lot of that steel was cut out.
Yeah.
Conrad took me up to that car body to see it before it was removed because we were talking about what might have to be done. And he and I talked about it, but the car in general was in pretty good shape. I was very encouraged that there will be a Wilkes-Barre car saved. And he was a very creative guy, and I'm happy that he helped get this whole thing started. But thank you for your presentation. That was very good. I really enjoyed it. I saw a lot of photos in areas that I had not seen photos before. I'm still looking for one on Main Street by my house where I grew up.
Where is your house?
Halfway on Main Street. You had a photo at the end at the curve by the gas station where the passing siding was. I'm about 5 houses back down the street. Somewhere in the middle there. There's no photos by the what was an old high school, which became Main Street Elementary School. I haven't seen a photo in that little spot there. It's neat. I really liked, and I'm sorry to take up time, but I really liked the photos that you showed of the bypass that was put in to get out to Luzerne to tie into the line to get out to Harvey's Lake. I've done a lot with Penn Pilot aerial photos, which are accessible to anybody online. And I've tracked down that whole Dallas trolley line. It's pretty neat. It's a neat line. You also mentioned that there was a car house out there in Luzerne.
East
or
Dallas Car
there.
House.
That's actually a powerhouse that was there. And it was on the news because there was subsidence behind it, and the creek, Toby's Creek, was going down into the mine. And they had to put a cofferdam around it, just similar to the Knox mine disaster, to send the water back down the road. And the last thing I'll comment on, that powerhouse was very interesting. On the other side of Toby's Creek on the hill was a mine. And so they built a chute from the mine to send people across over to the powerhouse. So they didn't handle it at all. It came from the mine straight down the chute into the powerhouse.
I did not know that. Thank you.
Yeah. It's in an old Electric Railway Journal article.
Wow.
And I think I finally found a photo where you could just barely see the chute. It's very difficult to try to figure it out. But look at the anthracite mining site. I forget what they call it, but it's on Facebook. They have a lot of great resources to look at all the mines and the breakers, and they have tons of photos. So it's a very interesting area. All of us who used to live up there don't live there anymore. And, it was a great place to grow up, but we're all gone and someplace else. Thanks again.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate that information.
Yeah. Well, I have more photos I can share with you. I found a couple others that you don't have, which I think add a little extra interest into things.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Other comments for George?
George,
Go ahead.
You're
the
feedbacking.
cars resemble the Boston Type 5. How did that come about?
Well, 772 and 4. That was an Eastern Pennsylvania Railways thing. They were looking for new equipment. And, the Boston cars had come off and the Reading cars came off. And I think they got 2 cars to experiment with, if you want to use the term, or demonstrate. And they came right off the Reading, out the back of the Reading line. I mean, they were already being built, so they built 2 for them. Now, when the rest of the fleet came in, and there were 2 different sizes. Wilkes-Barre called them short Pottsvilles and long Pottsvilles. And they all had the standard round end. But those 2 came right off the Reading border. Right behind.
Yeah, they did look like the Boston cars.
They were. They came right off the Reading, and Reading had the cars that looked like the Boston cars.
Yeah, I think the only difference were maybe sign boxes on the ends, and a couple other little nuances, but they were about the same car. You know who did an article on that was in the Trolley Talk magazine. Andy McGinnis actually made up some drawings and some tables and a bunch of other stuff to discuss those particular cars.
Columbus, Ohio had some similar cars too, I believe. Is that right? Ed, you might know.
I don't know.
Not sure about
I don't know
that.
much about Ohio. I have to admit, but maybe somebody here does.
It borders Pennsylvania.
Hey, can I add a question?
Sure.
How many models are that in back of you?
I don't know if he heard you.
A lot.
No, I didn't. Here, hang on. I'll be back.
Yeah, I think he has almost all of South Hills Tunnel car house back there.
It looked like he had a model of every streetcar that ran in Pennsylvania.
Okay, so there's a Reading car.
Well,
Okay, so that's your basic Boston Type 5. In fact, it was made from a Boston Type 5 body. And I think the only thing that's incorrect about it is that the end sign box is not quite correct. But the paint's perfect. You asked the question, what's behind me? There's a lot of 1700 PCC cars back there. And there's a couple of low floor Jones cars and over my shoulder.
yeah. Did you do your own painting, Ed?
No, those are St. Petersburg cars. This was painted, I think, by Norm Hauser for a friend of mine who passed away. He wanted to have, he collected things of trolley lines that he saw when he graduated from college. And he lived till he was 90, so he saw a lot of stuff. Very nice guy.
Other questions for George? We had a comment from Ray Janosko who said he didn't know that there was so much service up there. Yeah. And then we have another question about Zoom programs of cities we haven't seen. So George, you'll have to let me know if you have a let's see, York, Harrisburg, Erie, Conneaut Lake, Meadville, Northwest PA, Lancaster. If you have any of those, just let us know.
I don't have too much of that.
Yeah,
You're looking at
Lancaster
now-
isn't your area. I was trying to think that, the guy who might have known a lot about that was Fred Schneider, or is Fred
still
Schneider.
alive. He's still alive
Yeah.
and grouchy.
Yeah, yeah. I changed it to is versus was. Sorry about that. He has a bunch of stuff. There's, I think we've done Hershey, right? So Hershey
done
also
Hershey,
was
yeah,
close to
yeah.
the other lines. There's material out there. It's just trying to get it all together.
We had a great program from Mike Salagi and Andy McGinnis a few
Yep.
years ago.
Schuylkill Railways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of over around there, right?
Yeah.
Farther north.
Oh, okay.
So you're looking at what's known as the southern anthracite fields.
Mhm.
You're in Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, and you're in what's known as the northern fields. A lot of mining there. It probably a lot. And then you had Hazleton, and Hazleton is what's known as the eastern middle fields, and then you go over a hill, and now you're in the Shenandoah and Monoy City, Prattville, and you're in the western fields. And if you go a little farther south, you're still in the western fields, but you're getting into the Panther Valley too, and that's Eastern Pennsylvania Railways. Now, Eastern Pennsylvania Railways, and it was this. I'm sorry, Shamokin to Mount Carmel is another line.
That's one that Segali worked on, didn't he?
No, he does Schuylkill Railways. When the Shamokin to Mount Carmel went out of Shamokin, it went into Mount Carmel, and it went through Centralia, which is now gone because of the mine fire. And we have a roll sign on the wall, Kristen, with Centralia.
Yeah, it's so cool. I love that.
Down the hill, down this very steep mountain, and down the main street into Ashland. And at the east end of Ashland, they connected with Schuylkill Railways, which operated out to Monoy City and Shenandoah. And it went up into Prattville too. But
yeah, there was a lot of traction that went in and around through the Pennsylvania area, primarily to support the industries, and there was so much coal. That's why it flourished.
Yeah, we've got
it's
the
amazing.
Shamokin and Mount Carmel car now at the museum.
Yeah.
Awaiting restoration. Yeah.
Oh, George, one other thing I wanted to mention, you had an aerial photo of the car house in Kingston looking towards Wilkes-Barre.
it came out of a.
One thing I'm
I
not
think
sure you
that
realize.
actually that one
Now,
came
I'm
out
not
of
sure
a book.
that you realize that in that photo, if you look to the left-hand side or the upstream part of the Market Street Bridge, is the Wilkes-Barre and Eastern passenger station, which was the original railroad that crossed over where the Wilkes-Barre Connecting Railroad goes across.
Oh, yeah.
And that, instead of being up on the high bank, it curved down to grade at the right there by the Market Street Bridge, and that was the end of the line. So
But
that
down
was
below
another
along the
rail
river.
line that came in there that went right perpendicular to where the trolley car went.
Okay.
So something to check out. Information is really sketchy on that, but there's a Facebook group of railroaders that happen to pay attention to that, and they've come up with some interesting things.
Fascinating. You always learn more, even though I don't even remember how long this presentation was. We got like 2.5 hours of content, and there's always more, right?
Oh, there's always
Oh.
more.
Yeah, I mean,
I
George,
did not-
you
probably
really
didn't
pulled
use all
together
my
a lot of
photos.
stuff.
But
Nice.
Yeah, you pulled together a lot of really good stuff there. That was rather complete, and I thank you for that.
hey,
Yeah, there-
while we're on the line, and I know this has nothing to do with the program, but why don't you send me an email and tell me the kind of size you want for the Scranton pictures? So you want a JPEG, but you have a size
Oh,
pixels
I'll take
across
anything
and
you
that-
can send me. I'll use WeTransfer to send them.
But you want JPEGs, right?
Yeah.
If for JPEG.
We're working on Scranton trolley models.
Yeah.
I can reach around and find one somewhere if I knew where it was.
What I got to do is find space for it because I want one.
Yeah, well, Wilkes-Barre is doing them in the colors. So he can make you an O-scale Scranton car in blue, and he can make a Altoona Valley car in orange.
No.
And they turned out very nicely.
They're all scale or HO?
He has them in O, and he's doing them in HO too. Well, you're HO, so if you want those, he could do those for you too.
I have HO track. I might
Okay.
be able to fit the car in here in HO.
Yeah, we can stay on here, Kristen, for a while.
I'll go bring it. I'll go bring it back.
This is just like those meetings during the pandemic, Kristen.
Well,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, my comment anymore is that it's very difficult for one person to pick up or get together a project by himself. That we're finding that more and more group effort really does help. And like I picked up on the train station. Okay, there's a couple other little nuances in the story that are interesting. By the way, there is a drawing, George, of that Georgetown trestle. The one that
Really?
goes up on the incline and
Yeah,
turns.
by the Lower Line. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a drawing that shows that. It's sketchy, kind of more like a proposal drawing, but it's still a documentation of what was there. And you know, there's just a lot of neat stuff. Anyway, I'll let Kristen shut down.
Yeah.
I had a power
Probably
outage
needs
for
to
about
eat.
5 minutes where I lost my internet signal.
Oh, okay.
My generator kicked in. I had power, but I couldn't see the show. So I have to go back to recording. Thank you very much for recording, Kristen. That's really nice. Some organizations don't do that, and I think that's a real mistake.
If it's okay with the presenter, I'll always do it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's okay with
And-
me. And
Yeah.
And the
Well-
thing is even though people say, well, I don't know where the photo came from, so I can't attribute it to anybody, and therefore I can't show it to anybody else. Most often, the person who took the photo is now not with us anymore. And it's, if we can't see it, then we're not educated.
Right.
I was
Everybody,
gonna-
have a wonderful evening. I'm going to hop off. Thank you
thank
so
you very much for your
George.
comments, Ed. Thanks everybody for staying with me.
Great. And we have some other programs coming up. Make sure you sign up for those once we get them out. Thank you again to George. Thank you everybody for joining us. George, I'm gonna spoil what I keep asking you to work on.
Incline.
We'll see George sometime later this year, knock on wood, with a Pittsburgh Inclines program, right? Okay.
You know, that was a really interesting face you just made.
Hey, George, you know
Yeah.
that if you want to do an incline photo, at the library, there are digitized photos of so much old material
Which library?
in Pittsburgh.
Oh,
Carnegie.
okay.
Yeah, it's the Philadelphia, all the Pittsburgh photos that the street departments and everybody took. It shows the inclines going up the hill. It shows the railroad on the loop up at the upper end of the yard above the tunnel.
Oh, yeah. It was the one. Yeah.
Old rights of way before the new highways were put in.
Problem is you don't have photos of the stuff that disappeared by 1900.
Yeah, and plus, you know, you have the
one
railroad
coming up
tunnel
Second
that
Avenue.
came all the way through the mountain to the other side to the top of one of the inclines. You can add that into your story too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'll
Have a
figure
nice
it out.
evening. Bye-bye.
Our operations manager needs to stop telling me that he needs help.
There's just so many things to do.
There are.
Alrighty. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Thanks, George. Always awesome. We'll put this up on YouTube sometime soon. Hopefully, I won't get so behind again. Really appreciate you guys coming. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Bye.